The past few days have taken a turn that I never imagined possible, and I find myself at a crossroads filled with heartbreak and confusion. My wife, Marie, and I were in a car accident that flipped my world upside down, but it was not just the physical toll of the crash that has shaken me to my core. As we sat in the hospital, I discovered something that felt like an emotional wrecking ball. My wife had been unfaithful to me. There is no one in my life I feel comfortable confiding in about this. The sense of isolation is suffocating. I'm not even sure what I need right now. Is it advice? A pep talk? Or maybe just a way to vent? My main social media account is filled with memes and light-hearted humor, a stark contrast to the turmoil I am wrestling with. I've created this throwaway account because the weight of what I'm feeling is driving me to the brink of madness. Life has pushed me to the edge, and I find myself struggling to hold on to my sense of integrity. I question everything about what is right to think, say, or do in a situation that feels so surreal. Let me paint the picture of what led me to be typing this out in a hospital room. It was yesterday morning around 7:30 a.m. when everything changed. Marie and I were involved in a serious car accident. Miraculously, I came away with only a few cuts and bruises, nothing major. However, Marie was not so fortunate. She sustained severe injuries including a crushed shoulder, a broken collarbone, 3 broken ribs, and a collapsed lung. The doctors anticipate that she will make a full recovery, but for now, she is heavily sedated and unable to engage in conversation. Typing this out on my phone feels like an uphill battle, yet I press on because I need an outlet. I wouldn't even be sharing this if everything were right in our marriage. I have sensed a growing distance between us over the past 3 months, but I could never have imagined it could lead to infidelity. She was sedated, the lights were dimmed, and I settled back into the recliner, staring at the ceiling while the rhythmic sounds of the medical machines filled the air. Lying there, a whirlwind of thoughts consumed me as I grappled with how my life had spiraled to this point. A part of me felt as though I was extending her an undeserved mercy simply by being in the same room, while another part clung to the love I had for her. I felt weak for even harboring any positive emotions toward her amidst all that had happened. Over and over, the reality echoed in my mind: things could never return to how they once were. It was as if a natural disaster had swept through our lives, leaving the foundation we had built in ruins. In that moment of solitude, I cried. I cried harder than I ever thought possible, understanding that a significant chapter of my life was closing. The weight of the moment loomed over me, marking a pivotal shift in my existence. The next morning, when the nurse entered the room to take blood, I felt the need to excuse myself. When Marie stirred awake and called out to me as I headed for the door, I pretended not to hear her. I needed a break, so I made my way to get some breakfast. Ever since the revelation of the accident, my appetite had diminished considerably, but I attempted to distract myself by eating and scrolling through my phone. I noticed an unread text from Becca, inquiring about Marie's whereabouts. As the clock struck 7 a.m., I decided it was late enough to knock on Marie's parents' door. Her dad was generally an early riser, and my plan was to talk to him first. If he felt it was necessary, he could wake his wife. As I approached the house, I noticed the smoke rising from the wood stove in his workshop out back, so I knocked before stepping inside. Upon entering, he immediately noticed the scratches on my neck and the bruise on my cheek. I explained that there had been an accident, and while Marie had sustained the most injuries, we needed to discuss something significant. I think he initially assumed I was referring to the accident itself, so he woke my mother-in-law to join us in the kitchen. I began explaining how the crash unfolded, how, while navigating a curve, a car in the oncoming lane veered into ours. Despite driving a heavier vehicle, I managed to keep control until we struck the guardrail. The impact threw Marie against the passenger side, causing severe injuries despite the side airbags deploying. I reassured them that she was stable and expected to make a full recovery. Tears filled their eyes at the thought of their daughter suffering, but relief washed over them as they realized she would still be around to love. However, when they began to express their willingness to support me in caring for Marie, I felt the need to cut them off. I explained that while the accident was grave, it wasn't the only reason for my visit. I could see the confusion on their faces as I recounted my morning. I had sent a text before heading out into the snow, concerned about Marie, only to walk in on her with a man I had never seen before. The shock on their faces deepened as I described how I had unconsciously attacked him in a fit of rage. After sharing the details about Marie's hospital room, I expressed my hope that they could remain friendly with me, as I always wanted them to be part of the kids' lives. I mentioned that my dad was currently looking after the children, but as for me, I was divorcing their daughter. I stressed that she had broken our vows and was no longer my wife. I explained I was heading to my dad's house to inform the kids about the wreck and, inevitably, that their parents would no longer be together. I decided against mentioning that their mother was unfaithful. I told my former in-laws that, while I hated the circumstances that led us here, at least I could take solace in knowing I hadn't been the one who destroyed our marriage. They attempted to reassure me, suggesting I should reconsider and that Marie had made a mistake. I simply smiled, expressing my appreciation for having them as in-laws over the years, before walking out. Arriving at my dad's place, I knew there was so much I needed to unload. Entering through the kitchen, I found him sipping a cup of coffee. The only thing he was aware of was that I was supposed to be on a cruise in the Caribbean. He stood up and asked what I was doing there, and I braced myself for the conversation ahead. When I arrived at my parents' house, the tension was palpable. They looked at me with a mix of concern and confusion, wanting to know what had brought me there at such an early hour. In that moment, overwhelmed by emotions, I couldn't find the words to explain. Instead, I reached out, grabbed him, pulled him into a tight hug, and let the tears flow freely, just like a child. It was clear he wanted to understand the situation, but he also sensed that I needed to release my pent-up feelings before diving into the details. He gently guided me into the den, settling me onto the couch, and went off to fetch my mother. We both tried to urge her to have a cup of coffee first, hoping it would ease the tension. But deep down, she realized that my presence alone was a strong indicator something serious had happened. I took a deep breath and began to explain everything, starting with the painful revelation about Marie cheating on me. I recounted how I had caught her and the deep emotional impact that had on me, leading to my decision to leave Becca. Then, I moved on to the car wreck. I described it in detail, explaining how severe it was and the extent of Marie's injuries. I shared that I had only informed her parents about the accident a short hour prior, allowing them the chance to visit her at the hospital. As I spoke, I could see my parents absorbing the weight of my words, their faces reflecting shock and disbelief. Finally, my mother asked the question that hung heavily in the air, now what? With a heavy heart, I told them that my only option left was to move forward with filing for divorce from Marie. I emphasized my determination to be the best father I could for my children, despite the situation. The room grew quieter as both my parents, moved by the gravity of my circumstances, shed tears at the painful path ahead. As our conversation began to wind down, I heard a familiar voice. My daughter Carrie squealed, "Daddy," and came bolting down the stairs to me. Her joyful presence stirred my son awake, who had been sleeping in a nearby room. In those few minutes, I felt a surge of happiness wash over me. I hadn't seen them for so long, and the warmth of their hugs was a comforting reminder of what truly mattered. It took a while for my children to notice the scratches on my arms. I gently explained what had happened in the accident and reassured them that their mommy was in the hospital but would be fine. I let them know that Marie's parents would eventually come to pick them up and take them to see her, leaving it at that. The rest of the day was spent in blissful distraction, playing, talking, embracing, napping, and even laughing together. Their lively spirits awakened a sense of purpose in me that had been dormant. Until then, I had been feeling torn about whether I truly wanted to carry on with life. But now, I understood that they were worth living for, worth protecting and cherishing. As the evening approached, I remembered that Marie's phone had been severely damaged in the accident. Consequently, no one had received any communication for days. However, later that night, I noticed texts coming through from a number I recognized as Marie's. Her messages were hitting my phone fragmentarily. I decided to ignore them, turning off the notifications so I wouldn't be disturbed any further. The next day, I made phone calls to 3 different law offices, seeking legal advice on initiating the divorce process. I wasn't particularly eager to have a legal separation, but I understood it was necessary to divide assets and define custody arrangements for our children. What Marie chose to do with her life was no longer my concern. After meeting with 2 offices, one particular firm resonated with me, and I planned to meet with a third-rated lawyer, just to be sure that I was making the right decision. Regardless of my choice, I felt satisfied knowing I would be reducing her options for legal representation. My main focus was on custody. I knew I didn't want full custody. My children needed their mother in their lives, even if I couldn't have her in mine. Because of what she had done, Marie would remain a stranger to me. I figured there would be no reason for me to engage with someone who had hurt me in such a profound way. I envisioned a future where drop-offs for the kids could happen smoothly, without any need for personal interactions with her. Looking ahead, I was preparing to return to work the following week, which coincided with what would have been our cruise. I planned to keep quiet about the trip, the wreck, and everything else that had transpired. I knew my co-workers would probably see me driving the rental car, but I wasn't inclined to share the details of my personal life, especially in such a humiliating context. Divorce is often viewed as a failure, and sharing my business felt daunting. Yet, I had to remind myself that I was no longer willing to be an anchor for a ship that had already sunk. As for the health concerns people had urged me to address, I had undergone complete screenings for STDs, and thankfully, every test result came back negative. That relief was a small comfort in such a chaotic time. I felt a tinge of shame at the thought of being perceived as a trenchcoat pervert, but I reminded myself that I had been innocent in this whole situation. By this point, I assumed that Marie had left the hospital, as her parents hadn't even attempted to bring her home. They couldn't have reached out to me, thanks to the incessant stream of texts from Marie that I had chosen to ignore. It became clear to me that I needed to file for divorce as soon as possible and serve her the papers. I longed. The consequences of her actions represent the most significant error in my life, rendering all the moments we shared meaningless. If given the chance to go back and alter my choices, I would undoubtedly choose a different path. I would select a life partner who embodies faithfulness and loyalty, someone who wouldn't betray my trust. The thing I once appreciated most about her, her potential for trustworthiness, was carelessly discarded by her own choices. The transition from having someone to call my own to facing the stark reality of solitude will be what I lament the most. Yet, deep down, I am aware that the love I thought we shared was a mere illusion, and I was insignificant in her eyes. People are often captivated by beautiful deceptions while shying away from harsh realities. I refuse to be one of them. Many have expressed curiosity about the details of her infidelity, the identity of the person she strayed with, the motives behind her actions, and the duration of her betrayal. However, I find myself disinterested in uncovering those specifics, and frankly, I do not wish to know. In my view, outside of an extreme situation where someone might threaten your life, there is no viable justification for cheating. When two people forge a life together, they make a commitment to uphold each other's trust and happiness. To willfully decide to shatter that bond is an act of deep moral failure. It is despicable. I often find myself wishing that I had never crossed paths with her and had instead taken the risk of pursuing a relationship with someone else, anyone who could provide the loyalty I desperately needed. She had no right to grant me a life filled with hope and then strip it all away without my consent. The person I was before her betrayal is gone for good, that version of me will never return. The woman I fell in love with never truly existed, she was merely a facade, an illusion that has now crumbled, leaving me in a world where my expectations of love have been irrevocably spoiled. In a recent update, I find myself uncertain about where to begin or even what to articulate when I finally find the words. One significant development is that I managed to secure the services of an excellent lawyer. Her firm is highly regarded for representing men in divorce cases in my locality, with a reputation that precedes itself. Unlike others who might have simply passed my case to a junior member of the team, my lawyer took personal ownership of my case. The environment at her firm is one of genuine concern, not merely focused on financial gain. Nadia, my attorney, has been indefatigable in her support, prioritizing my mental well-being amid this chaos. After formally agreeing to represent me, we went through the usual paperwork required for the case. I provided her with comprehensive details regarding our assets, bank accounts, and rough income estimates for both Marie and myself. During our discussion about the traumatic incident that led to this point, she inquired whether I had undergone an STD panel, to which I confirmed that I had and that everything came back normal. She also asked if I had documented any evidence regarding Marie's infidelity, such as photos or videos. I admitted that I hadn't thought of that in the heat of the moment. Taking swift action, she reached out to a private investigator her firm frequently works with, arranging for us to meet the following day. Living in a state that recognizes fault in divorce cases means I need concrete proof of her unfaithfulness to strengthen my position. Consequently, we established a system where one of her staff members would serve as the intermediary between me and Marie's father for all communication and arrangements. We instructed her aide to inform my soon-to-be ex-father-in-law that Marie could have the children for an upcoming weekend. Nadia also emphasized the importance of securing therapy for both myself and the children. I mentioned that I was scheduled for my first therapy session that week, but I hadn't yet informed the kids about the situation, so I planned to hold off on their therapy for the time being. She made it clear that as soon as I felt the children needed professional support, I should reach out to her. She even offered several therapist recommendations. Through all of this, she expressed what seemed to be sincere condolences for the painful journey I was navigating. Legal professionals usually evoke a certain level of distrust, but Nadia appears to possess true compassion and integrity. She provided me with a checklist of tasks and documents to gather before our next meeting. Many of her recommendations mirrored advice I had seen in support forums, so when she instructed me to pick up 2 DNA kits from the pharmacy, I viewed it as a standard procedure. After returning home with the kids that evening, I completed the cheek swabs for myself and them, packed everything neatly, and sent the samples off in the mail. The following day, I dropped the kids off at school and returned to work. Just after lunch, I received an email notification that has since changed everything. An email notification popped up in my personal account, and as I glanced at the screen, I noticed it contained 2 messages from the lab. My heart raced as I decided to wait until I got to my desk computer to open them. Once settled at my workstation, I clicked on the first email and followed the link to the results. As the page loaded, I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. The results confirmed what I had needed to know: my son Michael was indeed my biological child. A deep exhale of relief momentarily washed over me, but the weight of the situation was just beginning to bear down. I moved on to the second email, heart pounding. I clicked the link, and as I read the words on the screen, I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. I read it again, and yet again, trying to grasp the situation. The words settled into my mind like lead, and I found myself shaking my head in denial. I had to get out of the office before I completely broke down, but I managed to take screenshots of both results and quickly emailed them to myself, turning them into photo files for safekeeping. Once outside, I made my way to my car, where the gravity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I began to cry uncontrollably, the shocking realization that my daughter Carrie was not really my daughter tearing through me like a vicious storm. The emotional pain was so profound that I could only describe it as feeling like a piece of my very soul had been ripped away. I sat there, grief-stricken, with no idea who to call or what to do next. I simply wept, wishing with every fiber of my being that this nightmare could somehow be erased. In a moment of clarity amidst the chaos, I downloaded the 2 files from my email and quickly texted the pictures to my lawyer. Within 20 seconds, my phone rang. It was Nadia, asking where I was. Work, was all I could manage to say. She instructed me to stay put, assuring me that someone from the firm would arrive shortly. I ended the call, opened my car door, and suddenly was overwhelmed by nausea. I began to vomit violently until I was dry heaving, each wave of sickness reflecting the turmoil inside me. Just as I was regaining some semblance of composure, one of the paralegals arrived to pick me up. She guided me to the firm, and as soon as Nadia was able to wrap up her meeting with a client, she brought me into her office. Her first words were meant to provide comfort, reminding me that sometimes lab tests can yield incorrect results. She recognized the emotional turmoil I was experiencing and reiterated that I had every right to feel devastated. But she emphasized the importance of confirming the results through another test, this time at a local lab, to ensure there were no contaminants. I was in disbelief. All of this was happening after I had caught Marie cheating, and I had thought the DNA tests were mostly a formality. I never believed my wife would be unfaithful to me in such a devastating manner. The idea that she could have another man's child was horrifying. My mind raced as I considered how I could even confront Marie without rock-solid proof. The mere thought of confirming suspicions felt overwhelming. One of the staff at the firm had a blood pressure cuff and took my readings, confirming that my levels were elevated. Although I felt close to having a panic attack, I was also in a state of shock. It was surreal to grapple with the reality that my little girl might never have been mine at all. I felt a strange sense of relief that the kids were with their mother at that moment, but the uncertainty gnawed at me. I started to ponder the possibility that maybe both test results were wrong. What if Carrie was truly my daughter and Michael wasn't my son? The weight of all these thoughts was suffocating, and I knew I couldn't wait 2 days for answers. Nadia arranged for Carrie to be picked up the next day for a few hours so they could conduct the test in a sterile environment, assuring me that trained medical staff would oversee the procedure to prevent any mix-ups. I clung to that hope, but deep down, I knew the truth as the inevitable approached. The next day passed painfully slowly, and when the results finally came in, I was alone in my house, staring at the screen. It was confirmed, I was not Carrie's father. The second wave of grief hit me even harder than the first, and tears streamed down my face. I was relieved that Carrie wasn't there to witness my devastation. In the midst of my despair, I sent the results to my lawyer. Nadia called soon after to check on my well-being. She urged me to reach out to family, emphasizing that I shouldn't face this burden alone. With my heart heavy and tears still flowing, I got into my car and drove to my dad's house, sobbing the entire way. Upon arriving, I saw my mom, and it was evident that something was deeply wrong. Yet, the words eluded me. Finally, I managed to say, "Carrie is not my daughter." My mom looked taken aback, her face clouded with concern. She had heard me correctly, yet I found myself incapable of repeating the grim truth. After what felt like an eternity of silence, filled only with my quiet weeping, my mother stood up, her expression shifting into one of urgency. She took out her cell phone and called my dad, instructing him to hurry home but to drive safely, as I had just received terrible news. I sensed my father's concern ripple through the phone line. He must have wanted a hint of what was so dire, but my mother held firm, only reiterating the need for caution and a swift return home. He arrived within approximately 20 minutes, and the atmosphere was thick with raw emotion. We all gathered together, allowing grief to wash over us as we found ourselves unable to stem the tide of sorrow for hours on end. In that space, I took on the role of consolation from my dad as he offered me solace, and my mom similarly sought to comfort us both. Despite our efforts to support one another, we remained inconsolable, bound together by our shared heartache. They asked me about Michael, and I took a deep breath before reassuring them that he belonged to me. There was a palpable sense of relief etched across their faces, followed swiftly by a wave of guilt for feeling relieved that they were only losing one grandchild and not two. The conversation shifted to the future, and they inquired about my plans moving forward. In all honesty, I didn't have any concrete answers. The only certainty that occupied my mind at that moment was that Carrie would never be left wanting. I committed to providing her with everything she needed and most of what she wanted, regardless of the potential complications that might come with child support obligations. As dreadful as my personal emotions were, they paled in comparison to the sorrow I felt for Carrie, an innocent caught in the storm. I wondered if I wanted custody of her. Could I even secure custody if I desired it? Questions swirled through my mind, particularly whether Marie had any inkling of the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. Determined to seek the truth, I arranged to meet with Nadia after work on Monday. She informed me that she had consulted with a private detective who had been hired to follow Marie. Due to Marie's injuries from the accident, she hadn't been leaving the house, which explained the lack of recent evidence. However, one crucial piece of information Nadia requested was Marie's old cell phone, which I retrieved from a drawer at home. To my surprise, the detective was able to access her messages and various applications, almost as if he were navigating through her damaged phone. He uncovered explicit photos exchanged with multiple men, along with an avalanche of texts filled with admissions, enough to sway any judge in a custody battle. When offered the chance to view the images or read the messages, I declined. Instead, I chose to focus on how I would confront Marie regarding Carrie. Nadia suggested that it might be best to have the discussion in her office if Marie could be convinced to meet. She contacted Marie's mother right in front of me, and I heard Marie's voice for the first time since I left the hospital. Nadia got straight to the point, insisting that Marie needed to meet with me to discuss several important matters. To my surprise, Marie expressed she had been waiting to talk. When asked if she had a lawyer present, she stated she did not, but she agreed to come in the following afternoon for the meeting. The next day dragged on in a haze of anxiety. I struggled to keep composure at work, fighting back tears and pretending to be productive while I felt like a lunatic. Lunch sat heavily in my stomach, but I managed to leave the office at 3, making my way to the firm with an overwhelming sense of nausea. I arrived first, intentionally positioning myself to ensure that Marie would have to enter the room, find a seat away from the door, and wouldn't have the chance to approach me directly. As I scrolled through pictures of our ideal family, one that never truly existed, she walked in, requiring assistance as she navigated her way, still encased in 2 casts from the wreck. The prospect of her trying for a hug didn't worry me. It seemed unlikely she was genuinely seeking comfort given the circumstances. I had a lot on my mind, and I just wanted her to sit down so I could demand an explanation for everything that had transpired. Once we were all seated, the meeting commenced with an offer of water. My attorney opened the conversation by asking Marie if she was comfortable with us recording the proceedings. She readily agreed. However, as soon as we hit record, Marie began to express her apologies, and I couldn't hold back any longer. I interrupted her, asking point blank how many men she had cheated on me with and when it all started. The private investigator had provided enough confirmation to know that the man I had caught her with was far from the first. Unbeknownst to her, I already had an understanding of the situation. I pressed her again, specifically inquiring about how many men she had slept with since our son was born. That time frame seemed to give her pause, but she persisted in acting oblivious, underestimating the gravity of her actions. As her demeanor started to irritate me, Nadia placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, gently urging me back from the edge of my frustration. Nadia then turned to Marie and asked if I was a good father. Without hesitation, Marie described me in glowing terms, asserting that she couldn't have asked for a better father to help raise her children. In my quest to become a better father, I found myself in a situation that left me reeling. I wanted to confront the troubling way she referred to her children, suggesting a casual detachment that made my blood boil. It was at that moment Nadia posed a question that cut straight to the core. Was the other father of her child going to be a good dad too? This prompted Marie, in confusion, to ask what other father Nadia was even talking about. My heart raced as I slid the paternity results for Carrie across the table, knowing full well what the implications would be. Despite the disdain I felt for the life I was thrust into after discovering Marie's betrayal, I felt an unshakable need to witness her reaction firsthand. When she read the results revealing that Carrie was not my biological child, her face contorted in shock. I had prepared myself for many potential reactions, but the stunned silence that ensued was like a punch to the gut. Almost instinctively, she attempted to deflect with the old argument that I was the one who had raised Carrie, trying to convince me that my role filled the void of a biological father. I had to stop that narrative in its tracks. I demanded to know who Carrie's real father was. In that moment, Marie looked down, her demeanor tinged with a hint of shame. It seemed as though she was trying to shield someone, hinting at an uncertainty when she confessed that she didn't truly know who the father was. It was during this tense exchange that Marie witnessed me break down in tears for the first time. The weight of the situation became too much to bear, emotions I had been holding back exploded. As I wept, I saw her eyes well up with tears as well, but she attempted to explain herself. She reminded me of the postpartum depression that had consumed her after Michael was born. I tried to be as understanding as possible, recalling how I devoted myself during that time to caring for our son so she could have some semblance of time for herself. There were indeed days when her struggle with depression left her bedridden, and during those moments, I took on the responsibility of caring for our family. Reflecting on those days, I remembered feeling proud of my dedication, thinking that getting through those challenges would strengthen our bond. Yet, I came to realize that it had only made me blind to the cracks forming between us. Marie didn't place the blame solely on her friend Rebecca, but I couldn't shake the feeling of relief when she began to reconnect with her during those girls' nights out. However, I would later learn that those nights weren't just innocent gatherings. Marie confessed to me that on one of those outings, she drank excessively and engaged in inappropriate behavior with a man, something that haunted her for months but ultimately led her down a path of reckless abandon. She admitted to wanting to relive her youth, feeling resentful of the responsibilities that came with motherhood. This led her to hook up with other men while she was out with Rebecca, a pattern that continued until the night before our disastrous car accident. Over the years, Marie insisted she never intended to develop feelings for any of these men. She claimed to always use protection and made a point of never sleeping with the same guy more than 3 times. Her insistence that she simply wanted casual sex struck me as both naive and reckless. The revelation that my wife had been unfaithful felt like a shattering blow, akin to discovering I was living in a reality show that I didn't choose to be a part of. As Nadia pressed for more answers, she asked if Marie had any idea who Carrie's father might be. Marie continued to express her belief that Carrie was mine, but it became increasingly clear that something had gone horribly wrong. My lawyer logically suggested that perhaps a condom had broken, which led Marie to admit this had indeed happened a few times with different men. The frustration boiled over within me as I questioned the woman sitting across from me. I wanted to scream, to demand to know who she had become. I asked her when she had started to hate me and what I had done to deserve this treatment. My anger morphed into a deep sorrow as I grappled with the reality of what she had done, especially the implications for our daughter. It hit me that what was once a marriage now lay in ruins, and the fallout extended far beyond just us. I started to tally the casualties of our relationship in my mind. I had lost a wife and a daughter, which counted as 2 losses. Marie had lost a husband, making that 3, and our daughter had lost a father. The impact also stretched to include the wider family, as my brother now faced the reality of having a sister become a half-sibling. Marie's choices had essentially obliterated 2 entire families. I could already picture her parents' shock and disappointment as they would hear the truth. I vowed that I would have them see all the evidence, every painful detail of the betrayal she had laid at my feet. Marie further revealed that she had been meeting men from dating apps, using her time out with Rebecca as a cover for her infidelity. She insisted that hurting me was never her intention and swore she had no idea how far things had spiraled out of control. But the reality was clear, everything we once shared had been irrevocably changed. I had absolutely no idea that Carrie wasn't my biological child. The realization hit hard, and for a moment, disbelief washed over me. I genuinely believed her when she insisted that she hadn't known either. However, the truth lies in the science of DNA, and that truth is unwavering. When I confronted her about why she hadn't simply chosen to divorce me instead of dragging this out, her response was startlingly candid. She told me she stayed in the marriage because she didn't want to lose the security that I provided for her. It was a raw and emotional moment, and as she spoke through her tears, I felt a torrent of emotions coursing through me. But even as she cried, my expression remained one of scorn and disgust for the woman sitting across from me. I felt completely used, humiliated, and utterly emasculated. The culmination of this emotional turmoil left me feeling defeated. One factor that likely prompted her to come and talk to me without the presence of a lawyer was the knowledge that I owned everything in this relationship. She doesn't have much to lose aside from a modest 401k, whereas I entered the marriage with considerable assets, primarily stemming from an estate I inherited from my grandfather at the tender age of 14. The woman I refer to as my mother is not my biological mother. my birth mother passed away from a rare and aggressive cancer when I was just 2 years old. My father remarried when I was 4, and from a young age, I was aware that the woman I called mom was not my biological parent. Eventually, I learned that she was unable to have children, and bringing me into her life allowed her to experience motherhood in a nurturing way. The inheritance that came to me after my biological mother's father passed away was significant, but I wouldn't have access to it until I turned 21. Throughout my childhood, I worked diligently, focusing on my education. Financially, I was set. I didn't have to work if I didn't want to. My ex knows this, and the reality is that she understands I would have the upper hand in any divorce proceedings. There's no way she would receive anything close to half of my assets. While she has a job, her current injuries prevent her from working, so her financial situation is precarious at best. As I sat there, conflicted feelings battled inside me. Part of me wanted to punish her for the betrayal, while another part just wanted to move on and be done with everything. Marie, my ex, appeared to be under the influence of pain medication during our talk, which may explain why she was so forthright with her responses. Her words cut deep, and my imagination twisted them into even more painful interpretations. I asked her if she felt any shame for what had transpired. She claimed she did. I brought up the pressing matter of how we were going to find out who Carrie's biological father really was. My soon-to-be ex-wife began to declare that she already knew, spouting off some philosophical ideas about what it meant to be a father. In my mind, I was not interested in abstract discussions. I wanted concrete answers. It is crucial for whoever Carrie's real father is to know about his child, and Carrie also deserves to understand her medical history and family background. The evidence uncovered during the investigation did not point to any potential fathers before Carrie was born. I pressed Marie, asking if she could locate any of these men or if she had saved their contact information. Incredibly, she had the audacity to say that the purpose of losing their numbers was to ensure they never entered her life again. I was taken aback, completely stunned by her logic. I reminded her that she might have wanted to keep those numbers to inform those men about a child on the way or to discuss potential health risks like STDs. I want my name removed from Carrie's birth certificate. The DNA results have made it abundantly clear she is not my child. Nevertheless, I will continue to provide her with financial support long after she turns 18, ensuring she never wants for anything. As for my son, custody arrangements are now muddled. Before the paternity test, I was leaning towards a 90/10 arrangement, intending for my ex to have custody one weekend a month along with certain holidays. Now, with Carrie being proven not to be my child, I feel morally conflicted about pursuing custody for her, even if I had the opportunity. Michael, my son, is indeed Carrie's brother, albeit half-brother, and I don't want to take him away from her either. The last thing I want is for either child to suffer due to this upheaval. Since I haven't seen Carrie since the test results, I am desperate to maintain my composure in front of her. I cannot allow her to witness the emotional breakdown that threatens to consume me. The financial burden concerning therapy for Carrie weighs heavily on my mind. I know I will have to cover those costs, and there is no way to ascertain whether her true father can provide for her needs. Meanwhile, my own therapy is a pressing concern, and the expenses associated with that will likely leave a dent in my finances. Driving home after that painful meeting, a dark thought crossed my mind. Perhaps ending it all would be the most convenient solution for everyone besides myself. Both families could continue to feign ignorance regarding paternity, my ex could live freely while spending my grandfather's hard-earned money, and the children wouldn't have to navigate the complex fallout from this broken situation. However, by the time I arrived home, I firmly rejected that notion. Instead, I have resolved to have Nadia draft divorce papers as well as legal documents to have me declared not to be Carrie's father. This path will certainly prolong the divorce process, but I no longer see any alternative. I want to make it clear that I have no intention of being legally bound to interact with, financially support, or otherwise engage with offspring that are not biologically mine. At this moment, my legal team is actively researching various ways to ascertain the identity of the father of the child in question. Many ancestry websites have been suggested as potential tools to help identify any relatives or connections that might emerge from the ancestry results. As this is our immediate plan of action, we remain hopeful that even if the tests do not pinpoint a specific individual, they may still reveal a brother, cousin, or another type of family member who could lead us to the child's father. Whoever he is, I can only imagine that he may not yet be prepared to accept the reality of a child he didn't know existed. This situation might disrupt his life and cause him a significant amount of anxiety. Still, I doubt he could understand the magnitude of the feeling I've experienced, the profound anguish of losing a daughter who never actually existed. Everything feels hopelessly disordered at the moment, stability has become a distant memory, and chaos is a daily burden that weighs heavily on me. The kids are scheduled to return to the house on Sunday afternoon, and I find myself grappling with an odd mix of emotions. I've never before wished for a break from seeing them, but the inevitability of their return looms over me like a dark cloud. I cannot prepare myself for the moment when she sees me and reaches out for a hug, calling me, Daddy. I'm unsure how I'll react in that moment. Will I wrap my arms around her and cry, feeling the weight of knowing that she has never truly been mine? Or will I tell her that I'm not the person she's looking for? The idea of being cruel to her is unbearable, yet my heart is shattered, and there's no one to whom I can direct this pain. I cannot even direct it toward Marie, because nothing I could possibly do, aside from committing an unthinkable act, could ever equal the depth of betrayal she has inflicted upon me. The injustice of it all is staggering, and I feel as if she's already triumphed in this twisted scenario. As I navigate these overwhelming emotions, I am reminded of the child I have with her. I know she will attempt to use our son as a weapon against me, manipulating situations to her advantage. It's excruciatingly painful to accept that I made the choice to bring a child into this world with someone who has turned out to be so deceitful. This realization has shown me that I am not the only one who has made naive decisions. In a recent update, I received a text from the attorney representing me at 3 p.m. on Sunday, notifying me that she had safely loaded the kids into the car, complete with all their belongings, and was en route to our house. In that moment, I doubt any text message has ever filled someone with as much dread as that one did for me. Ironically, merely weeks prior, I would have felt elated at receiving such a message, eagerly anticipating their return. But this time, what should have been a joyful reunion felt like a weight pressing down on me. I had no intention of mentioning the divorce, paternity, or any issues related to the kids during their visit. Despite my attempts to mentally prepare for their arrival, I was acutely aware that my emotional state was far from stable enough to navigate those topics. Instead, I hoped to create an atmosphere that felt as normal as possible, reminiscent of the times when the kids stayed with their grandparents while Marie and I enjoyed vacations. However, I knew that the reality would likely shatter that illusion, and I would have little control over how things unfolded. Jessica, the intern from the law firm, finally pulled into the driveway, and I caught sight of their car as I looked through the front bay window. As I stepped outside and walked down the steps to greet them, I managed to muster a smile as I approached the passenger side of Jessica's car. But the moment I laid eyes on Carrie in her car seat, with her radiant smile directed at me, the floodgates opened, and I found myself crying. I was still smiling, though, as if that expression could somehow mask the turmoil within. I held on to the hope that if I could maintain this facade of happiness, it might convince both the kids and myself that everything was all right. I wish I had a plan B for how to navigate this situation. As soon as I got Carrie out of her car seat, Michael appeared by my side, and I took both of them into my arms, hugging them tightly. I told them I missed them, which felt like the only thing I could say in that moment. I continued to cry, and I am fully aware of how others may judge my emotions and actions. Many people have sent me hateful messages, both in private and public forums, but in this moment, their opinions felt irrelevant and distant. It was a stark contrast to the day I said goodbye to my children, a day that brought a different kind of loss. I wanted to believe that this reunion would feel the same, just to alleviate the burden of those who consider me a detestable person. Perhaps part of the loss I was experiencing in that moment stemmed from the realization of how deeply I had invested in something that had fallen apart. The feeling of loss that consumed me was not just about the ending of a romantic relationship, it was a profound mourning for the family unit we had all once known and cherished. The reality of it all shattered my heart into countless pieces. Each time I saw them, I was reminded of the immense void left behind by Marie's betrayal. The fact that this little girl, who once seemed like an extension of me, was now a constant reminder that she was no longer mine was an ache that tore through my soul, leaving me feeling utterly broken. Every single day felt like a new chapter of heartbreak. With each passing moment, I discovered more about the depths of Marie's infidelity, learning about her repeated betrayals. The pain I was confronted with was not just mine to bear, it was something I couldn't shield the kids from, no matter how much I wanted to protect them. I often reflected on the bonds we had forged in the past, bonds I now knew were built on a foundation of lies. I found myself retreating from the volcanic chaos that erupted the moment I uncovered Marie's deceit, yet every day, I felt the fallout in the form of emotional debris raining down on me. It felt relentless. Jessica had been my saving grace, the one who helped me gather the children's belongings in that frantic rush. With all the bags piled high, I acted like a pack mule, trying to manage everything while she deftly closed the doors and trunk of my car the moment I placed their things on the floor. In that deeply emotional moment, I turned to see Carrie looking up at me, her face reflecting an understanding that cut right through my heart. She didn't utter a word, but her gaze conveyed everything. It was as if she sensed that I was the one in need of comfort. I squatted down to her level, and she instinctively walked into my embrace, wrapping her little arms around me with all her might. In that instant, the weight of the world hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt an overwhelming urge to be strong for her, but no child should have to witness their parent in such despair. Everyone around me kept insisting that I should do whatever I could to minimize the damage to them. While that sounded logical on paper, I couldn't help but wonder, what if everything I was doing was still damaging them? What if I couldn't shield them from this pain? I knew allowing Carrie to witness the downfall of her source of strength, a once unbreakable bond, had to be harming her in some way. The idea of abandoning her was even more heart-wrenching, as I understood just how devastating that would be. At the same time, staying in her life felt equally damaging, especially since I could see the hurt lingering behind my smile. A 6-year-old shouldn't have the weight of comforting an adult, particularly when that adult was going through something beyond their comprehension. In that moment, my soul was consumed with rage directed at Marie. It felt unjust that the little girl she had falsely claimed was mine was the one extending love to me when she herself had been lied to. The realization hit me hard, a moment of clarity that neither of us chose this situation. In our own unique ways, Carrie and I were both victims of this chaotic mess. As the adult, I was expected to maintain composure and handle things better, while Carrie remained blissfully unaware of the true extent of her victimization. We were like two survivors of a plane crash, clinging to each other amidst the wreckage. Though we had emerged from the ordeal, the emotional scars would linger long after the chaos had subsided. In that moment, I understood that it was essential for us to stick together, to support one another through this turmoil. We were navigating a complex emotional landscape, both dealing with loss but from vastly different perspectives. I felt a surge of pain accompanied by a fierce desire to shield her from the chaos, even as I experienced it myself. I had been viewing this entire situation as Marie stealing my daughter away from me, yet it was equally true that Marie had taken a father from Carrie. In this harrowing narrative, I recognized Marie as the true villain. I resolved to stop feeling guilty about my emotions. There was no parental handbook detailing how to react to this kind of betrayal. While online discussions on platforms like Reddit might provide logical advice on navigating infidelity and divorce, they couldn't possibly articulate the profound emotional turmoil I was experiencing. To give an analogy, it was like a couple discovering their children had been switched at birth. Both parents faced a double betrayal of trust. Unless someone has endured this sort of psychological trauma, they can scarcely grasp the depth of the pain involved. After what felt like an eternity, I finally managed to gather my thoughts. Jessica departed after sharing a hug with all three of us, but before leaving, I slipped her a small envelope containing $500. I knew she drove an electric vehicle, and she understood the money wasn't actually intended for gas. As I carried Carrie in my arms, Michael excitedly showed me some projects he had crafted with his grandfather. All the while, Carrie kept her arms wrapped around my neck, ensuring I felt her warmth and support, reminding me that she was there for me, too. I couldn't help but engage in my usual playful banter, pretending not to believe Michael as he recounted his accomplishments. In that brief moment of connection and shared laughter, I held tightly to my children, seeking solace in their innocence even amidst the tumultuous storm of our reality. The moment Michael joined in on what began as a simple playful interaction quickly transformed into a lively tickle fight, first with Carrie and then with him. It was a scene filled with pure joy, a mix of laughter and squeals that resonated deeply in my heart. Witnessing Michael's happiness, seeing him laugh, was a glimpse of brightness for my fractured soul. In that instant, everything felt right, yet there was a bittersweet tinge to the joy. I understood that the bliss we experienced in that moment was fleeting. The future ahead seemed to hold little promise for such moments of carefree happiness. The two of them teamed up to wrestle with me, and I found joy in seeing them work together, even if it was at my expense. The bond they shared, as siblings, made my heart swell. I thought ahead to when Carrie would be old enough to date, and I hoped that by then, I'd have instilled in her the strength to say no when she needed to, with conviction and confidence. Since she was a baby, music had been a significant part of her life. I always played music around her, and we had developed a tradition of dancing. From the first week of her life, I would hold her close and twirl around, right up until just a month ago. I was fully aware that my dancing might look silly, but I didn't care. We had fun together, and Carrie delighted in matching my silliness with her own. For dinner that night, I decided to order takeout via Uber Eats. Although we weren't Asian, our family certainly indulged as if we were, especially when it came to food. Michael, despite only being 10 years old, could truly put away some serious amounts of food. And for reasons I couldn't quite fathom, Carrie had developed a fondness for crab rangoon. As for me, my appetite had vanished. Whatever weight loss struggles I had faced were overshadowed by the enjoyment of being reunited for dinner with them. They had both gone to school that day, and I had taken the time to bathe them, put them in their pajamas, and get them ready for bed afterwards. Michael had a routine of settling down with a book to read before sleep. I hugged him tightly, told him I loved him, and promised I'd see him in the morning. Then, I tucked Carrie into her bed and picked out a storybook to read to her. While reading, I pointed out various elements in the illustrations, engaging her curiosity. As I watched her grow drowsy, a wave of emotion washed over me, and I could feel tears beginning to blur my vision. Leaning down, I kissed her gently on the head and uttered those words, "I love you," for the first time since learning about the changes in our family dynamic. I didn't care if anyone called me the biggest softie for expressing my feelings, saying it felt like a huge release, a way to acknowledge the reality of my emotions. Everything in my life had felt like a struggle recently, as I worked hard to differentiate between what was real and what was merely a facade. My love for Carrie was undoubtedly real. I loved her deeply. Despite the turmoil, I felt an undeniable shift within me. I transitioned from a mindset of wanting to take nothing away from her to a growing desire to give her everything I could. It was a considerable and significant change in my perspective. In the back of my mind, I found myself waiting for Carrie to express her love for me, not because I doubted it, but because I wanted to hear her say it. Instead, she surprised me by saying, "Mommy loves you." Her innocent words struck a chord, and I made a conscious effort to keep my tone gentle, wanting to understand the context behind her statement. I asked her sweetly, "Did Mommy just say that, or did she tell you to tell me?" It seemed that my soon-to-be ex-wife had to explain why I hadn't been visiting them and why they wouldn't be coming home together. To my surprise, she had referred to her parents' house as her new home, which to a degree, relieved me, but the confusion surrounding the "I love you" remark still lingered. I pressed further, and it was then that Michael entered the room, revealing that their mom had told them she wouldn't be returning home because I no longer loved her. How was I supposed to respond to that? It would have been too easy to accept the blame, to say, "Yep, it's all on me. I just fell out of love with your mom. Blame me." That wasn't going to happen. In an effort to maintain some semblance of normalcy, I called our usual babysitter, hoping she could come over for a few hours while the kids were asleep. This way, she could study or get her own work done while getting paid, and she agreed without hesitation. As I prepared to leave, I got into my car and drove straight to my in-laws' house, not bothering to call ahead. Upon arrival, I knocked on the front door and asked to see Marie. Her mother led me to Marie's childhood room, where she was recovering from her injuries. As I stood there, I turned to her mother and placed my hand on the doorknob, signaling that Marie and I needed to have a serious conversation. Sensing my agitation, her mother quickly vacated the vicinity as soon as I closed the door behind her. I wasted no time, asking Marie just who she thought she was by trying to pin the dissolution of our marriage on the notion that I could never love her again. She responded, stating it was the truth. While I didn't deny her words outright, I pointed out that the reason I couldn't love her any longer stemmed from her own actions. The reason I could never love her again lies in the undeniable truth that she has become a figure of deceit and treachery, embodying qualities I once could not imagine in her. She's transformed into someone I view as lacking worth, constantly shifting blame onto everyone but herself. It's infuriating to think about how she attempts to manipulate the narrative of our lives, trying to downplay her actions while painting me as the villain. She has even tried to apologize for her misdeeds, but the sincerity of her words fell flat in my ears. I reached my breaking point during one of those conversations, harshly questioning what good a mere apology could possibly offer. An apology won't erase the pain she caused, nor will it prevent further harm from occurring. Despite her claims of remorse, deep down, I am convinced that she does not genuinely understand the depth of her actions and the devastation they wrought. In a moment of frustration, I confronted her about how she could manipulate our innocent children to cast me in a negative light. If there were any remnants of guilt within her, I would have expected a more honest and heart-wrenching answer. Instead, she coldly asserted that I became the bad guy in our marriage when I refused to give her a second chance. This response left me in disbelief, prompting me to question her mental clarity. I asked her point-blank about the pain medications she was on and whether she had been combining them with alcohol, searching for an explanation as to how she could feel entitled to demand mercy after her actions. But there is no justification for treating another person with such disregard. The dignity and respect that should have been part of our relationship vanished because of her choices. It feels as though I no longer recognize my wife. It's as if she has been overtaken by some malevolent force, and the person who once was my beautiful, virtuous partner has been replaced by someone who embodies traits I find repugnant. I can't help but see her as a soulless figure, someone whose previous values have been sacrificed on the altar of casual encounters. The thought of what she has done, and the risk she has put me in, feels almost surreal. I needed to ask her if she thought her actions were justified, if she truly believed that sacrificing everything in her life for fleeting moments of physical connection was worth it. She argued that it wasn't only about sex, claiming that part of it stemmed from a need for validation. Her insistence that she enjoyed being pursued only fueled my anger. How could she feel validated by actions that would be perceived so negatively by everyone around her? The reality is that her actions will forever define her in the eyes of others. She has to face that consequence. Marie and I invested countless hours discussing her feelings of depression after the birth of our child, Michael. During those conversations, she acknowledged that I had been the best support a husband could provide, which only deepened the sting of her betrayal. I confronted her with the obvious question: why would she choose to inflict such profound hurt when we had experienced such a monumental moment in our lives together? She revealed that despite feeling love for both Michael and me, there lingered a profound sense of anxiety that made her feel suffocated and helpless. Even though she had a wonderful support system and had been under care from some of the best professionals, she felt an overwhelming sense of guilt for not living up to her own expectations. The weight of motherhood, a role she had longed for, suddenly became a burden that she doubted she could carry. This spiraled into a withdrawal from friendships and social interactions, despite her verbal reassurances of love and apologies directed toward me. Her apologies began to feel hollow, and I began to wonder if they were premonitions of the betrayal that would follow. When her friend Rebecca showed up unexpectedly, I felt a rush of hope. I believed Rebecca might be the catalyst for Marie to break through her shell of isolation, yet even after that initial meeting, it took a significant amount of time before Marie was willing to engage socially. Just getting her to go out for a simple coffee felt like a major victory. There were plenty of those around me who thought I was foolish for letting my wife socialize in bars or clubs, especially with a single friend. Most would have been correct, and looking back, I realize I should have put my foot down much sooner. However, in that moment filled with anxiety and sadness, I hoped that some semblance of normalcy would help bring Marie back to life, back to the person I fell in love with. When she began to express how challenging it was for her to transition into the roles of wife and mother in such a short span, I listened intently. She claimed that the attention she received from men, regardless of their intentions, gave her a fleeting sense of self-worth. It was difficult for me to process her justification of her actions, especially when she exclaimed that her first indiscretion was a result of intoxication. But the truth remains, it happened willingly, and that reality changed everything. It all started with a simple moment that spiraled into something far more complicated. Once the knob was turned, and certain actions were taken, it became clear that she was aware of the consequences of her choices. She understood that if I found out about her infidelity, it would shatter everything we had built together. She entered the marriage with virtually nothing in terms of assets, and she knew that I was the one who provided her with stability and security. I confronted her, asking if she ever considered that I might eventually learn of her betrayal and how I would react if that truth came to light. Her response was revealing. She acknowledged that discovering her unfaithfulness would devastate me, claiming she felt an overwhelming sense of guilt and remorse for her actions. When I pressed her for clarity on why she continued to cheat despite knowing how much it would hurt me, she explained that the moment her mind cleared after each instance of betrayal, she was overwhelmed by feelings of guilt, shame, and regret. I recalled a specific time, following her first night out with Rebecca, when she was unusually somber for an entire week. During that outing, Rebecca had come to visit, and the two of them spent hours alone talking. From that point on, I felt like I had the old Marie back, the one I fell in love with. She revealed to me that she confided in Becca on the day she realized she felt unworthy of my love because of her actions. She understood that if I ever discovered the truth, it would end our relationship, and she feared I would seek revenge on Michael, the man involved in her betrayal. Her plan, as she claimed, was to take this secret to her grave and strive to be the best wife possible, hoping to make amends. Looking back, this should have raised alarms for me. I might have appeared naive, but we had a child to care for, and at that time, I was shouldering nearly all the caregiving responsibilities at night. I had seemingly gotten my wife back during that period. Had someone suggested to me that this was a warning sign, I would have dismissed it outright. It felt miraculous to have Marie back to my side. Within 2 weeks, I returned to work, first part-time and eventually full-time, just as Michael was falling into a routine. Reflecting on the time surrounding Michael's first birthday, I remember those moments as some of the happiest of my life. However, learning later that these joyful experiences stemmed from her efforts to atone for a single moment of indiscretion has forever changed how I view those memories. When I questioned her again about why she chose to cheat, particularly when I believed we had a fulfilling sex life, her response left me disheartened. I had always perceived her as enjoying our intimate life together, and aside from her periods of depression, I thought we were in a good place. She explained that the longer she kept the secret of her infidelity, the worse she felt about herself. After Michael was born, her internal turmoil escalated, and she felt unable to express her struggles to me. She recognized that I would want to comfort her if I noticed her sadness, yet she couldn't bring herself to share her feelings. She described the struggle of maintaining a facade of happiness while hiding a heavy secret, a burden that she had become consumed by. There was a pivotal moment when I attended a reunion of my biological mother's family out of state, bringing Michael along to introduce him to my relatives for the first time. At the last minute, Marie cancelled, claiming she was unwell. In hindsight, I understand that I couldn't have changed the choices she made in the past, but perhaps I could have prevented her from continuing down this deceitful path for 6 long years. The realization that something I held dear had been tainted by her actions was painful. I wasn't going to shoulder the blame. She should have been there with us. Ideally, she would have confessed her infidelity and allowed me the space to move on with my life. Instead, we were entangled in a web of multiple mistakes and lies, all executed with little regard for the consequences. It felt as though what she did was a betrayal not just of our marriage but of someone she claimed to have loved. During a moment of vulnerability, she shared that she felt so deeply unhappy that weekend I was away, believing she was unworthy of my love, even if I hadn't realized it. It was her way of punishing herself, rationalizing that perhaps she deserved this torment. She feared revealing the truth would lead to my disgust and rejection. Despite the love I continuously showed her and the reassurances I offered, she reached a point where she believed that my affection could never hold the same value again, given what she had done. She called Becca, looking for someone to lean on, and according to her, Becca encouraged her to go out for drinks. That night, she was initially overwhelmed with emotion, crying and seeking guidance on her next steps. Then, with a few shots from the bartender aimed at lifting her spirits, the situation took a turn. While she didn't need to verbalize it, I could sense that Rebecca was nudging her toward flirting, which ultimately led to her kissing a man in an alley behind the bar. It was a moment she caught herself in, but not before the damage had already been done. She stepped back inside, a wave of despair washing over her that was deeper and more suffocating than before. The weight of her actions pressed heavily on her conscience as she grappled with the realization that she had succumbed to temptation once again, finding solace in alcohol rather than honesty. Becca was trapped in a cycle, craving someone to come to her aid, someone who could assist Marie in dealing with the fallout inside. In a moment of painful irony, she turned to the very man who had just shared an intimate encounter with my wife, feeling the raw sting of betrayal burn her skin. Rebecca, in her turmoil, chose to leave them there, allowing the scene to unfold as clothing fell away and boundaries blurred. In a desperate attempt to confront the chaos that had enveloped our lives, I asked her pointedly if there was ever a fleeting thought of Michael in her mind during these betrayals, if our son had even crossed her thoughts while she deceived both him and me. Her anger flared as she insisted vehemently that she had never betrayed her son. In that moment, I felt the bitter truth slip from my lips, making it clear that her betrayal extended beyond just me and Michael. It rippled through our entire family, touching Carrie, our parents, and everyone who once witnessed our wedding vows. She had severed the sanctity of our family bond, of our marriage, and it left me shaking my head in disbelief. Despite everything we had endured, I told her she should have just let me go. If she had chosen a different path, I would have ensured that Michael was taken care of, allowing her to live freely without my presence haunting her. She could have indulged in whatever fleeting pleasures she desired after our divorce. I would have been indifferent to her choices. The thought of her dragging my name through the mud was almost laughable to me. But what disgusted me further was how she wove deceit into every interaction, as if she had mapped out a strategy. It seemed there was a method behind her madness, a calculated approach to avoid emotional entanglement with the men she pursued. She referred to it as fishing, a way to keep them at a safe distance. She would engage, let them feel a connection, and then pull back, maintaining control over the pace of the interaction. It was all a game to her, and the realization that she was so casual about her infidelities made my blood run cold. I looked at her with an expression of disbelief, shaking my head again as I tried to comprehend the depth of her betrayal. As for the bartender, we were both certain he could not possibly be Carrie's father. The timing didn't add up, and Rebecca had insisted that their encounter was a one-time thing. I probed further, attempting to piece together the names of those she had entertained. Perhaps she could recall a couple of first names, but ultimately, it was enough to stifle the conversation for the night. My initial desire for clarity was overshadowed by the reality that such details would not pour out in a single evening. I hadn't walked into that situation seeking a full confession or an exhaustive recounting of her infidelities. I was simply trying to process the wreckage left in the wake of her decisions. She was sitting in a chair, propped up comfortably with pillows supporting her cast. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice for emphasis as I told her she was a pitiful example of humanity. I truly believed she lacked a soul, her actions spawning unimaginable pain that would continue to ripple through all of our lives. With unwavering resolve, I looked her directly in the eyes, asserting that I would not allow her to hurt my children anymore. I made it clear that I was the one who had been deceived for 6 long years. If anyone deserved a moment to focus on their own needs, it was me. I meant every word when I told her that her manipulation and pettiness would only deepen my disdain for her. There was no path forward for us. Reconciliation was not an option. The thought of her even touching me again sickened me. The concept of loyalty seemed completely foreign to her, but I was committed to being a steadfast protector for Carrie. Whatever it took, I would shield her from her mother's web of lies and deceit, even if it meant resorting to drastic measures. I reminded her that Nadia had connections who would gladly assist in declaring her an unfit mother and that I was serious about this threat. I wanted her to understand the gravity of her situation. If she felt the urge to voice her grievances, she could say them to me directly. I would not allow Michael or Carrie to act as messengers, relaying their mother's words. Carrie deserved to remain blissfully unaware of the complexities of our divorce for now, and when the time came to discuss paternity, I would be the one to break that news. I would explain to her how her mother had victimized both of us, but that we would rise above it together. There was no way I would grant Rebecca the opportunity to downplay her actions or shift blame onto me. I had no intention of disclosing that painful truth until absolutely necessary, and I would be the one to choose when that moment arrived. I pointed out her lack of legal representation and reiterated that the kids would be staying with me, making it clear that I wouldn't relent on that front. The kids will be staying with me for at least the next 2 weeks, a situation that has arisen from a complex emotional turbulence surrounding their mother. She needs time to reflect not only on her profound betrayal but also on the cruel manipulation she employed, which will inevitably hurt our daughter, Carrie. It's essential for me to establish boundaries, so I will communicate to her that she must earn the right to be a mother again. Right now, she is incapacitated, bound in 2 casts, and there's little she can do to influence the situation. I'm the one caring for the kids, and as she grapples with her loneliness, I believe it's crucial that she understands the weight of her actions. Reflecting on my own life choices, I can't help but think about the mistakes I've made. During the drive home, I kept wishing that I could have foreseen the outcome of our relationship. This has become the most significant struggle I've faced to date, and I genuinely hope it remains the most challenging ordeal I will ever encounter. So much has been destroyed, the sham of a marriage I was navigating needs to be dismantled completely. It requires being reduced to dust, and those remnants need to be tilled with salt to ensure no weeds of our past can grow again. However, amidst this chaos, I am determined to protect Carrie, who remains blissfully unaware of the tumult between her mother and me. I want to maintain her innocence for as long as possible, shielding her from the emotional fallout of our conflicts. When Marie and I are in the same room, the atmosphere becomes thick with toxicity, an aura that is harmful not just to us but also to the children. I refuse to expose them to our arguments or disagreements. No matter how much I want to assert myself in this situation, I will not engage in a fight in front of them. I'm fully committed to putting her in her place and calling out any lies or manipulative behavior she exhibits, but I will do so without involving the kids. This situation has become overwhelming, and I feel as if every choice I make sends ripples through our lives with unforeseen consequences. The notion of man up feels irrelevant. What truly matters is that I do everything in my power to prevent Carrie from being hurt. My intention is not only to support her but also to fight for her well-being. I am uncertain how this situation will ultimately unfold, but both Carrie and I have been misled and betrayed by the same person. I refuse to let Marie inflict the same harm on Carrie that she has done to me. Any future relationships she pursues will not involve my daughter unless I deem it appropriate. I will take charge of meeting anyone she may become involved with and will make my decision based on what I believe is best for Carrie. Until that day arrives, my focus is on my son Michael and my daughter Carrie as we navigate the storm that has been thrust upon us. I've managed to shield them from much of the impending chaos, but I know that our emotional wounds will surface before this process concludes. The inevitable fallout could have been avoided, yet now that it has begun, I can't protect them from every piece of shrapnel that might come flying our way. I acknowledge that I'm venting. This was initially meant to be a simple update. However, the weight of it all feels too heavy to bear alone at times. I've sought therapy twice a week in hopes of finding clarity, though I'm unsure if it's making a difference just yet. It feels early in the process, so I'm willing to persist with my therapist for a few more sessions to see where it leads. As the day draws to a close, I'll post this and step back for a while. Expressing these feelings has been therapeutic in itself, and I appreciate the support I've received. My primary focus now has to be on my healing and ensuring this transition is as smooth as possible for the kids. I am grateful for the encouraging words I've received and intend to return the favor, offering help to others in similar situations when the time is right. This update feels scattered, but it's difficult to isolate any part of my life from another. Each thread of my situation is intertwined, making it hard to discuss one aspect without bringing in others. If this narrative comes across as disjointed, I hope for your understanding. What I once thought was my life now feels like a distant dream. Marie created a reality for Michael, Carrie, and me akin to being cast in a reality show without our consent. When the show was cancelled, the facade was stripped away, leaving us to confront the stark reality of our circumstances. Each day, I remember the happiness of my prior life, yet knowing that it was built upon lies makes it clear that I wouldn't want to relive it. The greatest change I must share is that I am no longer legally recognized as Carrie's father. Despite never being her biological father, my name has now been removed from her birth certificate. This alteration shifts my role. I am now her stepdad. While it may sound strange, this change is a necessary step in redefining our family dynamics. When the divorce is finalized, it officially marks the end of any connection between her and me. As things currently stand, we will be nothing to one another, a reality that feels surreal after sharing so much of our lives together. What should have been a straightforward process, typically taking about 2 months, extended to 4 long months largely because of the ongoing divorce proceedings we had to navigate. A significant hurdle in this legal journey was the requirement for my name to be removed from her birth certificate to allow us to proceed with the divorce in the correct legal manner. Given that the child in question is not biologically mine, I felt justified in seeking the removal of my name from a document that tied me to someone else's child. However, the final decision rested with a judge, who would determine if my request was in the best interest of the child. The law binds a man to pay child support for 18 years if DNA proves paternity, but in situations like mine, the court system often prioritizes other matters, leaving the issue of name removal from legal documents to be dealt with later. In my case, I was prepared to demonstrate to the judge my commitment to providing ongoing financial support in the form of car payments, health insurance, and supplemental insurance for the child. Many men in similar circumstances may find themselves unable or unwilling to provide such support, and it's a troubling issue that should not be left up to a judge's discretion. While I was able to navigate this unjust system without it causing me undue harm, that does not mean the situation is fair. From the moment I discovered that Carrie was not my biological daughter, I found myself wrestling with overwhelming emotions that I struggled to articulate. This knowledge was emotionally devastating, and I felt shattered in ways I could hardly put into words. Yet, in addressing Carrie's situation, I recognized that allowing my emotions to dictate my actions would only lead to chaos. Emotions can easily mislead us since they are not always grounded in reason or logic. It would have been equally misguided to let my affection for Carrie or my resentment towards Marie dictate my decisions. Legally, I had every right to sever ties with both Marie and Carrie, as neither was my responsibility. However, morally, I could not bear the thought of Carrie suffering financially due to her mother's misguided choices. Ethically, I needed to make sure that Carrie never felt responsible for her mother's actions. After a considerable amount of reflection, I came to understand that both Carrie and I had been victimized by Marie, my soon-to-be ex-wife. Marie's infidelity stripped me of my agency in our relationship. She never communicated to me that her love had waned or that she had been unfaithful. I was blindsided, not informed of her betrayal or her decision to conceive a child with someone else. Instead, I was led to believe that I was raising a daughter who belonged to me. Carrie was never given the opportunity to voice her preference regarding who she would want as a father, nor did she have any say in the circumstances of her existence with Marie. I wanted to give both Carrie and myself a voice in this confusing situation. The day after my name was officially removed from Carrie's birth certificate, I filed a petition to legally adopt her as my daughter. This had been my intention all along. I needed to be certain that seeing her wouldn't bring back painful memories of Marie's betrayal. Until that moment, I couldn't fully trust my reactions. The idea of embracing Carrie felt like facing a stark reminder of the hurt I had endured when I found out about Marie's infidelity. I understand that people may have their opinions about my feelings and my approach, labeling them as signs of fragile masculinity, as a toxic feminist once suggested. However, the prospect of seeing Carrie again filled me with uncertainty. I grappled with the decision of whether to abandon Marie and Carrie, a choice I had the legal right to make. Still, the relationship I had with Michael, who is Carrie's brother and Marie's son, influenced my choices significantly. Michael is a good brother, and the bond he shares with Carrie played an essential role in my decisions. Despite the biological differences, I see Carrie as my daughter and want her to remain a part of my life. The connection I have with Michael does not diminish my commitment to Carrie, and while our relationship may not be the same as the one I share with my biological son, I am determined to be a father figure for her. I felt it necessary to legally clarify our relationship, opening up new avenues for opportunities that we had previously been denied. On the surface, it may appear that my actions are simply a series of legal maneuvers to restore what was lost, but for me, it represents the desire to redefine our relationship and ensure that Carrie has a stable and supportive environment moving forward. To get right back where I stood. My marriage was built on a foundation of lies, and the relationship that I had with Marie turned out to be nothing more than an elaborate charade, likely from the very beginning. I find myself yearning for a do-over, a chance to choose a woman to love, one who might offer the loyalty and faithfulness that I so desperately deserve. Yet, that opportunity is forever out of reach. I will never know what could have been, what different choices might have led to a healthier, happier life. Even now, I wonder if anything, no matter how small, could have been better than marrying someone who proved to be so disloyal and untrustworthy. My children, especially Carrie, will not learn the sordid details of their mother's promiscuity and betrayal for many years, but it is important to me that they eventually understand my struggle to hold everything together for their sake. I want Carrie to grasp the extent of my feelings. Though I harbor a deep disdain for her mother, I consciously made a decision to choose her, to be her father. This choice was not just a legal obligation, it was an emotional commitment. When the judge asks Carrie if she wants me to be her dad again, I hope she responds without hesitation, her answer a reflection of the bond we've forged. Years from now, I want her to realize that it was her choice too, even if we were thrown together without any say in the matter. I am doing everything within my power, legally, to adopt her as my own flesh and blood. Even if she doesn't share my DNA, I want the bond we create to transcend that of mere biology. One day, when she is an adult, I hope she looks back and understands that I gave her the option to walk away, yet she chose to stay. I want her to feel joy in that choice, to recognize that I didn't have to be her dad, I actively chose to embrace that role, solidifying our connection beyond any familial ties. While there are relatives I am connected to by blood whom I would rather not have in my life, I had no say in those relationships. But with Carrie, we made our own choice. We faced this challenge together, and I want her to know that our love is genuine and unwavering. Life has become an exhausting endeavor, consisting of simply taking each day as it comes while attempting to navigate the chaos that Marie has introduced into our lives. Though it is draining beyond measure, I often find myself contemplating how I want my children to perceive the reality of our situation in the years to come. When they eventually learn about their mother's actions and the painful circumstances that led to our present state, I want Carrie to feel a sense of revulsion at the betrayal we endured. I hope she will appreciate that I continued to care for her despite the lack of financial support from her mother. I want both of my children to feel grateful for the sacrifices I made to shield them from the fallout of their mother's decisions. Together, we emerged from a situation that could have torn apart our family, and I want them to recognize the stability I fought to maintain even when it felt like the ground beneath us was shifting. My determination is unwavering. There will be no revisionist history spinning tales of falsehoods 10 or 20 years from now. I know beyond a doubt that Marie is selfish and morally bankrupt, and one day, my children will come to know that truth as well. I hope they make their own decisions about their relationship with her when that time comes, and I can only focus on removing Marie from my life as completely as possible, making my children my priority above all else. Recently, I received numerous messages regarding how I handled the situation after Marie told the kids we could never get back together because my love for her had vanished. The very next day, I took both Michael and Carrie out for ice cream at a nearby park, hoping to provide them with some comfort amid the turmoil. Michael seemed resigned to the reality of my feelings for their mother, even if he didn't like it. Carrie, on the other hand, struggled to process the fact that I didn't love her mom and was upset when I explained that her mother didn't genuinely love me either. Confusion and tears filled the air as I tried to provide them with the truth they needed to face. It was paramount that I assured them I love them both more than anything in this world, and that their mother loves them deeply as well. It's a complicated reality we didn't ask for, but I needed them to hear the honest truth and confront the circumstances we all find ourselves in. I emphasized that what matters most is their love for me and for their mom. Carrie asked why I don't love her mother, and while I wanted to be forthright, I grappled with how to express my thoughts in a way that was appropriate for her age. The best I could do was explain that her mom had lied to me and caused me pain. In response, Carrie wrapped her arms around me, trying to console me through the hurt. It was a painful realization that nearly shattered my heart as I thought about the weight of everything that was happening. The children were blissfully unaware of the turmoil that loomed on the horizon, issues that would soon demand their attention and understanding. Michael, in his innocence, turned to me and asked what the future held regarding the divorce. With a heavy heart, I explained that the kids would be living with me during the week, and I would ensure that they were taken care of in a home that was familiar to them. I reassured them that a court would determine how the weekends would be divided between their grandparents' house and their mother's place. I made a promise to them that from that point forward, their mother and I would keep our disagreements private, away from their ears. The night before, I had a long and necessary conversation with their mother. I felt compelled to share this with them, knowing they needed some clarity. It pained me when Carrie expressed her desire for her mother to stay with us again. It broke my heart to tell her that was a situation that could never happen, no matter the circumstances. The truth was too harsh to sugarcoat, but honesty was essential. She mentioned that her mommy had said she wanted to return and live with us. I looked Carrie directly in the eyes and replied that while her mother might express that wish, it was simply not possible anymore. I tried to explain the reality of the situation as gently as possible. I told them that one day, when they were old enough to understand, I would tell them why their mother could no longer share a home with us. I emphasized that their mother had betrayed all three of us. Although I knew they weren't ready to grasp the full implications of my words, I promised to clarify everything when the time was right. Carrie appeared to accept my words with a measure of understanding, but Michael was different. He was troubled and wanted to know how old he needed to be to fully comprehend his mother's actions. When I told him it wasn't merely an issue of age but rather of maturity, his frustration was palpable. He accused me of dodging the question. In that moment, I chose not to argue. Instead, I expressed my desire for them to love their mother and to treat her with the respect she had not earned through her actions, simply because they had no reason to think ill of her. I reassured them that there would be a time when I would share with them all the truths they needed to know, even if it might paint their mother in an unfavorable light. I contemplated leaving letters behind in my will if need be, ensuring they'd have a record of my thoughts in case their mother was involved with someone dangerous. However, I believed there would come a time when they would see a version of their mother that would undoubtedly provide them with insights into her true character. They had been through so much already, and though it would hurt them to learn what she had done, we would remain united, forged by our shared hardships, and create a decent life together as her three biggest victims. I couldn't pretend to hold any affection for their mother in front of them. That would be disingenuous. The contempt I felt for her was overwhelming. The thought of her suffering brought me no sorrow. In fact, if she were to face death, I wouldn't shed a tear. The pain she inflicted on me and the kids was unforgivable and entirely her doing. She had allowed herself to spiral into something I could barely recognize, causing a ripple of stress and tears through our extended families. In my mind, she had squandered any opportunity for forgiveness or compassion. I dismissed any notion of sympathy for her injuries, viewing them instead as a mere consequence of her choices. It was hard not to feel a twisted sense of satisfaction when I heard through the kids that she was having pins removed from her shoulder. The thought crossed my mind that I hoped they employed a strong electromagnet for the procedure, but I kept that dark humor to myself. A few weeks passed after our conversation when Michael came home from their grandparents' house with an envelope addressed to me. I couldn't bring myself to toss it in front of the kids, so I placed it on the counter among the junk mail, intending to read it later once they were asleep. As the house quieted down, I found myself passing by the letter, and curiosity got the better of me. Upon opening it, Marie began with an apology for the hurt she caused, claiming she never meant for things to escalate to this point. She wrote about how she had lost touch with who she was and who she aspired to be. She acknowledged the pain she inflicted on the children, and as much as I disliked her, I had to admit that if she had stopped there, I might have grudgingly respected her honesty. But then she continued, expressing that she still loved me with all her heart, a sentiment she claimed would never change. That notion struck me as laughable, an absurdity that made me chuckle softly to myself. I realized that she genuinely believed the words she was putting down on paper, and that was what made it all the more humorous. But as I read further, she claimed that because of her love for me, she didn't want to develop feelings for any other man, as her heart belonged to me. I shook my head in disbelief. How could she justify sharing her body with others while professing such love? The irony was maddening, but it was also a reflection of the mess that had become our lives. She couldn't have possibly engaged in such a hurtful behavior if she truly loved me, she insisted. In her mind, giving her body to other men was a way to connect with feelings of youth and freedom, an experience she felt she had missed out on in life. She claimed that because there was no emotional connection with any of those men, her heart was solely mine. Essentially, her affairs were purely physical, and she framed this in a way that only someone with the most twisted logic could interpret as positive. By ghosting Marie, I aimed to protect myself from her chaotic whims, believing it was a necessary step for my own mental well-being. Yet, in doing so, I also prevented myself from fully grasping the depths of her depravity, both in mind and body. Countless times, I have reflected since that fateful day and realized I barely knew her. The words she chose to write to me showed she didn't know me either. She wasn't even attempting to anger me. It was evident in her writing that she viewed her actions as the lesser evil, believing that her emotional detachment from other men somehow preserved her heart for me. I can understand how devastating it is to know your partner is involved in an emotional affair, but the reality is that physical infidelity carries risks that emotional connections do not. Nobody contracts STDs from emotional relationships. No one throws a phone or computer at an emotional partner, nor does anyone conceive a child through online chats or texts. Given a choice, I would have preferred that she engaged in countless emotional affairs rather than crossing that line into physical intimacy. Her inability to understand this fundamental aspect of my feelings screams that she never truly knew me. To me, she chose the worst out of two evils, and it became glaringly obvious that she didn't comprehend my perspective. I've come across numerous posts from others who have shared similar experiences, but none claimed that their partner's infidelity was devoid of emotional ties. That's precisely what Marie was trying to assert, yet she failed to see that she was admitting to living the past 6 years of her life like a mindless hedonist. Her behavior resembled that of uncontrolled animals, driven solely by sexual impulses and instincts. While she recognized her actions as wrong, she still sought validation for her choices. Until I received that letter, I had little insight into how she rationalized the things she did without any semblance of conscience. Her willingness to embrace such a depraved lifestyle stripped away every ounce of attraction I once felt for her. I am left with haunting memories that replay in my mind because of her choices. These visions became even more disturbing after I discovered her with that random man, and they reached new lows upon learning about her numerous encounters that could easily fill a small army. When the private investigator presented me with recovered texts, photographs, and videos from her old phone, it shattered something deep within me. It's as if I had unwittingly been married to a live version of pornography for 6 years. My heart goes out to anyone who finds out their significant other has had a one-night stand. I truly empathize with the pain of that revelation. For those dealing with a partner engaged in a full-blown affair, my heart breaks for you even more. But what I experienced cannot be adequately expressed with words. To realize that the love of my life had been so utterly degraded, indulging in acts that would put the most disreputable prostitute of ancient times to shame, is beyond comprehension. I can no longer picture Marie in my mind without conjuring up images that I would rather forget. The debasement has altered my perception of her forever. The way she treated herself so disregarding of our relationship rendered her unworthy in an instant. She transformed into an emotional time bomb, ticking away through our years together. The looming motion to adopt Carrie was just one of the many pressing issues on Marie's agenda when the day of reckoning arrived. At noon, I filed the necessary paperwork, and just 10 minutes later, a sheriff's deputy showed up at her parents' house to deliver the divorce papers. Moments after that, another deputy arrived to serve her with the civil suit paperwork I had filed against her. During this tumultuous time, the calls and texts from her parents' phones went unanswered. Attempts to reach my lawyer were met with stark advice that she should acquire her own legal representation to set the wheels in motion. This marked the beginning of a long, painful chapter. That wasn't the response she had hoped for. The atmosphere in the office was charged with tension as she unleashed her frustration on several staff members that day, her voice echoing off the walls like a thunderclap. Nadia, attempting to maintain her composure amidst the chaos, eventually had to draw a firm line in the sand. She informed Marie that the divorce was proceeding, whether she liked it or not, and made it clear that any further harassment directed at her or her team would face serious repercussions. In some ways, I wished Marie had persisted in her attempts to assert control, even though orange was never a flattering color on her. The actions she had taken were nothing short of scandalous and, frankly, should be considered criminal. More than a week passed before a lawyer representing Marie reached out to Nadia. This initial conversation was significant, as he inquired about the seriousness of the civil suit aimed at recovering expenses related to raising a child who wasn't biologically mine. Nadia assured him that we were committed to pursuing every cent as a result of the paternity fraud that had been committed. Though she chose not to disclose it to him, the lawsuit transcended financial motives. Even if I were to win, the likelihood of actually retrieving any awarded amount was slim. The potential reward, however, was more about principle. Winning would mean that any compensation owed to me would be deducted from her paychecks until the debt was cleared, serving as a constant reminder and a form of punishment for her actions. Even in the event of a loss, Marie would still have to foot the bill for her own legal representation, adding to her financial burdens. The lawyer acknowledged that the bulk of our assets, including the family home, were mine long before I even entered into marriage with Marie. Yet he cautioned that it would be unrealistic to expect that we could gain custody of both children, require her to pay child support, and expect her to live without spousal support, particularly following Nadia's serious accident. Nadia countered his points, informing him that Marie had been unfaithful long before the accident, and now was hardly the best moment for her to get caught in her lies. Our objective was clear, to make Marie's life as painful as possible. While she was entitled to keep her retirement savings, given that my financial portfolio significantly overshadowed hers, savings that I had encouraged her to build by contributing the maximum allowed each pay period, she remained in a precarious position. She had never needed to contribute toward any household utilities, her only expenses being her car and insurance, leaving her with considerable funds to manage as she wished. Now, she was facing the grim reality of living off those savings, and it was evident to me that she was already beginning to feel the financial strain. If I won the civil suit, things would only worsen for her. As for her car, it had been the only asset of any real value registered in her name, and during a brief period when my own vehicle was wrecked, I found myself driving it around. This felt strangely satisfying, a petty form of revenge that allowed me to add mileage to her car. However, I eventually purchased a stunning new SUV and had a friend follow me to deliver Marie's car to her parents. I casually left the keys in the mailbox, unsure how long it would be until she could drive again. Given her history, I firmly believed she would be eager to return to her old ways and seek out new partners as soon as she regained her independence. Living at her parents' house might have felt like a return to youth and freedom, but having random men sleep over there struck me as distasteful. Eventually, she would need more elegant surroundings to entertain her new friends. Perhaps a luxury vehicle like a 2020 Acura would suit her newfound lifestyle better. I even considered the notion of donating her car to the local community college's criminal justice program. Those students would, after all, become familiar with the ins and outs of law enforcement as they prepared for their future careers. As warped as it might sound, one of the most satisfying aspects of delivering the car was the realization that it didn't come with a spare tire. That had been a significant point of contention when she first asked for my opinion on her purchase. I vividly recalled her sweetly assuring me that I would be her lifeline if she ever encountered a flat. It took all my restraint not to slip a note under the trunk mat that read something along the lines of, "Bet you wish you had a spare now." I was confident she would eventually come to understand the implications of her choices, but the wait for that insight was certainly part of the intrigue. A few days after the initial phone call with her lawyer, the two met in person to discuss matters further. Marie's side requested a meeting to talk over the situation regarding the car. I had reservations, yet I realized it was crucial to ensure that she didn't erect barriers that might prevent me from adopting Carrie. For our daughter's sake, I agreed to participate in this discussion, albeit reluctantly. I met them at Nadia's law firm, a place that felt both familiar and foreign at the same time. As I sat in the main conference room, trying to mentally prepare for what was about to unfold, Nadia entered. She was accompanied by opposing counsel and Marie, my ex. It was a moment that struck me hard, both in disbelief and a strange sense of detached curiosity. I remember thinking I had never truly understood the phrase, "looked rode hard and put away wet," until I saw Marie in that instant. Her appearance was jarring. It was almost as if I had stumbled upon someone I barely recognized, a ghost of the woman she once was. For what felt like an eternity, I sat there, grappling with the idea that my eyes were playing tricks on me, that perhaps my mind was harboring some kind of deep-seated resentment that distorted her image. It wasn't until I caught a side-eye glance from Nadia directed at me, a silent acknowledgement of Marie's shocking transformation, that I realized this was indeed reality. Marie had lost so much weight that the sides of her face appeared slightly sunken. She had never been overweight. In fact, shedding baby weight after her 2 pregnancies had always come easily to her. But now, she looked like someone who was on the brink of despair. I likened her to someone who was preparing for a mugshot in Florida, disheveled, careless, and lost. Her hair was cut short, not quite the infamous Karen style, but close enough to evoke that stereotype, and it looked as if it hadn't seen a wash in ages. I couldn't help but wonder what she had chosen to wear today, as nothing seemed to flatter her. I had made sure she got all her clothes back after the separation, so I thought it unfair for anyone to blame me for her dismal attire. While the two lawyers exchanged formalities and began the discussions, I felt Marie's gaze fixed on me. I resisted the urge to look her way, wanting instead to convey disdain and scorn without uttering a word. Finally, I stole a glance in her direction, and it sent a wave of melancholy through me. Where had the beautiful woman I once fell in love with gone? It felt like a bullet had dodged its target, transforming her in 6 short months from someone radiant into what could only be described as a bag lady. Now, I was just a fleeting memory for her, someone she had once known intimately. Thankfully, the conversation shifted toward Carrie, a topic that served as a distraction from Marie's appearance. The lawyers posed questions about whether any attempts had been made to find Carrie's biological father. I made it clear that nothing concerning that would take place until the divorce and custody matters were completely resolved. Then I probed Marie to see if any names came to mind that could lead us to baby daddy number 2. Just voicing that felt cheap, and I could tell she wasn't thrilled to hear it. But the truth was what it was. She shook her head, insisting that no names from that period of her life crossed her thoughts. Curiosity got the better of me, and I wanted to know if she planned to obstruct my legal adoption of Carrie. She stated rather emphatically that she wished I had never removed my name from the adoption in the first place and certainly wouldn't stand in my way of reinstating it. That simple clarification was all I needed to hear. I stood up, preparing to wrap things up and end our painful exchange. But before I could escape the tension in the room, Marie asked a question that took me by surprise. Could you have forgiven me and taken me back as your wife after my first mistake if I confessed and swore on my life to never stray again? In that moment, I understood immediately that this was more than just a question. It had been on her mind since the night she chose to step outside our relationship. She already knew the answer, just as I did. The sticking point was clear. Her asking this question was her way of making a bold statement about the reality of our relationship. To me, giving her body to another man was an irredeemable act. I had made it clear before that infidelity would result in an irrevocable end to our partnership. The time to talk about our relationship had passed, and everything that followed felt like nothing more than noise. After several minutes of heavy silence, I finally replied, somewhat reluctantly, to her question. I told her that she already knew I wouldn't have given her a second chance. I then hit her with a hypothetical. If I had fathered a child with a random hookup and then brought that child home to her 6 years later, would she have taken responsibility for that child? The atmosphere became charged, and things escalated quickly. Marie accused me of trying to hurt her, and while I didn't deny it, I felt no remorse. She claimed that I wasn't her parent and that I had no right to punish her for her past mistakes, particularly in the context of our ongoing civil suit. I made it clear that the divorce was indeed a form of punishment for her, while the civil suit aimed at seeking the justice I felt I was owed. Marie countered with a heart-wrenching statement, insisting that I was willing to destroy the kids' lives just to hurt her. In that moment, I couldn't help but think she looked like someone who had fallen far, perhaps even into the depths of substance abuse. When she started crying and professing her love, I rolled my eyes. Her tears no longer moved me, they were hollow, remnants of a past I wished to leave behind. The promise I made to take care of the kids, ensuring they had everything they needed, the food on their plates and the clothes on their backs, was not aimed at my partner's well-being. I made it clear to her that her own hunger or her choice to dress in sackcloth didn't concern me. There was a time when I would have moved mountains and sacrificed anything just to see her smile, just to make her happy. I confronted her, expressing my disbelief that my efforts and my love weren't enough to earn her loyalty. I wanted to know what I could have possibly done to prevent her from betraying my trust. Her response was heart-wrenching. She claimed that in her actions, she had betrayed herself. In a moment of heated confrontation, I pointed out the deeper implications of her betrayal. It wasn't just me she let down, she had betrayed our daughter, Carrie, and everyone else in her life who depended on her. The tension in the room was palpable, and our lawyers had to step in to mediate the chaos. During this time, Nadia provided them with a draft of a temporary visitation agreement, clearly outlining which weeks she would have the kids, which would help her manage her doctor's appointments more effectively. I took it upon myself to express my concerns about her choices. While I tried to maintain a sense of distance from her personal life, I made it clear that I had no interest in having unfamiliar men around our children. She assured me that she hadn't been unfaithful to anyone since our split, even though this wasn't the first time she made such promises. I pressed her about whether anyone apart from Rebecca knew the extent of her infidelity. She admitted that after the first incident, she had only confessed to her sister that she had kissed someone, which led to a significant argument between them. Marie was aware of the gravity of what she had done and kept silent about the full scope of her actions. No one else knew about her other affairs. In a moment of desperation and hope, she asked if there was any possibility we could consider counseling to see if our relationship could be salvaged. I couldn't fathom why I would ever want to revive a marriage that felt so lifeless, especially with the disdain that now characterized my feelings towards her. She argued that we never had a dead bedroom, but I countered that it was certainly dead now, as I had no desire to touch her ever again, particularly knowing the number of individuals she had been with. When she inquired if I hated her, I found myself at a loss. The complexity of my emotions left me uncertain if that was a question that could be answered with a simple yes or no. Deep down, every part of me was steeped in anger, and I recognized that our relationship was now in shambles as we awaited the divorce proceedings. The civil case hinges on the outcome of the divorce trial, and in the meantime, the kids seem to be coping reasonably well, spending time with both sets of grandparents, which, if anything, can be viewed as a small silver lining in this tumultuous situation. I'm aware that I need to move past this hatred, and I have sought therapy to help with that process. The journey to find a therapist I could connect with was challenging, but it has been worth the effort. My new therapist has affirmed that the reasons for my feelings of anger towards Marie are valid, even if I don't generally seek validation from others. Understanding that my emotions are rooted in legitimate grievances has been somewhat reassuring, even if it still weighs heavily on me. Learning to let go of bitterness is ongoing, and I'm still getting accustomed to the idea of meditation, even if it's not something that comes easily to me. My initial therapy experience was somewhat positive but ultimately fell short. In the first few sessions, my previous therapist was understanding and encouraging, praising my efforts as a father, which felt good to hear. However, as we began to discuss deeper issues that predated her infidelity, her tone shifted. She implied that sometimes partners let grievances fester over time without communicating, leading to explosive situations. Her intentions may not have been to blame me, yet it stung to think that my actions had contributed to our downfall, regardless of my pride and my belief that nothing I had done warranted the betrayal Marie inflicted upon me. After a few sessions, I decided to seek another therapist, feeling it was essential to find someone who could really empathize with my distress. I gave a male therapist a try, hoping he could understand my feelings of emasculation and the overwhelming flood of emotions I was dealing with. There was some understanding on his part, but I never felt completely comfortable discussing personal matters. I was thankful that I had already shed a lot of tears, but the idea of breaking down in front of a man felt wrong to me. My experience has shaped my view that guys typically bond over drinks, sports, or friendly sparring rather than diving into the emotional turmoil over their relationships. The complexity of this situation is evident when one considers the fundamental misunderstanding that exists between the two individuals involved. This man finds himself unable to comprehend his partner's love language, which creates a significant barrier in their relationship. Although part of him was willing to give her another chance, he realized that the potential for their relationship to flourish was limited. While some may dismiss this feeling as sexist, he acknowledges that he feels more at ease confiding in women. This preference stems from a history of seeking support from female figures who seem to understand him on a deeper level. Recently, he found a therapist who has become instrumental in his healing process. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah, being the only daughter among 3 brothers, possesses a unique insight into male psychology, which greatly benefits her clients. Her area of expertise is particularly focused on coping with infidelity and grief counseling, making her well-equipped to help him navigate the emotional turmoil he is experiencing. During their sessions together, when he recounted the painful events that brought him to her, he witnessed her genuine empathy as she used nearly an entire box of tissues to dry her eyes. Her reaction left him pondering whether her comments were meant to uplift him or if they were rooted in her astonishment at his resilience. Despite the struggles he faces, he is not in need of institutional care, yet he acknowledges that he must rely on Sarah's guidance to reclaim his life. Sarah has helped him immensely simply by providing a listening ear. She identifies him as someone who is challenging to read, noting how his outward demeanor does not always align with his friendly personality. She observes that he often resorts to humor to lighten tense situations, an approach he feels undermines genuine connections. He expresses frustration at her ability to see through his facade, but deep down, he knows she is gradually uncovering his true self. Sarah emphasizes her role as a supportive figure but insists that the hard work of rebuilding his life must come from him. He understands that he cannot simply pay someone to do the emotional labor on his behalf. This journey requires him to assess the extent of his emotional damage, undertake the necessary repairs, and make difficult decisions about what parts of his life he must leave behind. Acknowledging the pain he has endured, he realizes that coming to terms with the losses he has faced will be far from easy. The children are also engaged in therapy, 40-minute sessions individually, coupled with family therapy twice a week. This structured approach has proved beneficial for them as they learn to navigate their grief in a supportive environment. Despite the progress they are making, he fears how their sessions will unfold, particularly concerning his complicated feelings about their mother. He often remains silent when they express longing for their mom or reminisce about better times. He imagines illustrating his emotional scars in a crude way, but he understands that such actions do not genuinely reflect the complexity of human emotions. In an attempt to manage his feelings, he has actively sought out social interactions with friends, but casual conversations feel arbitrary and shallow in light of his situation. He recognizes that his friends are likely growing weary of his constant venting, and he makes an effort to keep his rants to a minimum, even though the betrayal he experienced lingers in the recesses of his mind. The pain persists, and whenever they go out for drinks, he contemplates his friends' commentary about potential romantic interests. Despite acknowledging that these women possess conventional beauty, he feels no inclination to pursue any new connections. Unlike his wife, who had her own hygiene issues, he finds the thought of casual encounters with anyone, regardless of attractiveness, utterly unappealing. The emotional fallout from his wife's actions has not only altered his perspective on romantic relationships but has also reshaped his views on human nature as a whole. Trusting others now feels more complicated. He finds himself questioning the sincerity and authenticity of people he once held in high regard. Where he previously admired his wife, he now grapples with feelings of betrayal and disappointment, extending this skepticism toward others as well. This situation has not rendered him misogynistic but has instead fostered a broader sense of misanthropy. Despite any remorse or guilt that his ex-wife may feel for her choices, he is painfully aware that she is likely to move on quickly, reigniting her sexual life with ease. He anticipates that she will regain her confidence and attract new partners effortlessly, a reality that he finds excruciating to accept. Meanwhile, he feels paralyzed, grappling with feelings of uncleanliness and emotional taint as he considers the intimate experiences she has shared with other men. The depth of his disillusionment is profound, so much so that not only has his desire for her vanished, his overall interest in sex has also evaporated. The connection they shared was once everything to him, and now he feels irrevocably changed, carrying the weight of this heartbreak alone. I found myself in a position where I simply didn't feel the need to look at other women. The connection I shared with my partner felt unique and irreplaceable. It seemed like something truly special that I couldn't just throw away. In truth, the concept of beauty no longer resonated with me in the same way it once did. My mind understood the differences and complexities of attraction, yet my subconscious still held onto a fixed view that all women were like Marie and Rebecca, which became a significant struggle for me. It may not have been entirely fair, but it was my reality. Recently, someone reached out to me with a kind message filled with encouragement. In their words, they expressed a sense of envy towards my situation as someone who was soon to be a single man while also being financially secure. They pointed out that I would likely have no trouble meeting women and that I would be seen as a high-value individual in the dating world. I appreciated the sentiment and thanked them genuinely. However, I hesitated to share that the prospect they found appealing filled me with anxiety rather than excitement. I am acutely aware of the modern dating landscape, where it seems that people connect and hook up all day, every day, in multiple places. That's their choice, and while I respect that lifestyle, it's not a path I wish to follow. I couldn't imagine being in a situation where I would have to let a stranger, no matter how attractive, invade my personal space. The idea of meeting someone at a bar or through a dating app, interacting minimally before jumping into something physical, is foreign to me. The thought of leaving the moment and going somewhere else to undress and engage in sexual activity without knowing the person well is astounding. In a society dominated by apps like Tinder and various dating platforms, my viewpoint probably seems unconventional and somewhat outdated. I can't help but wonder how often these individuals have repeated such intimate encounters with others, and it's difficult for me to shake that concern. For many people, the hookup culture is normalized. After all, someone like Marie, with her number of partners, wouldn't be considered atypical for a single woman today. It seems most men would eagerly adopt a similar approach if given the chance. Yet for me, that's simply not the case, nor has it ever been. I would never want to be with someone who had been with countless others. Part of me harbors lingering thoughts that Marie's lack of transparency regarding her infidelity was a way to get back at me. When I expressed my feelings, it almost felt as if she intended to make a statement about our relationship. In her mind, it seemed like if I wasn't open to giving her a second chance, she would do what she knew would hurt me the most. It was as if she was testing me, trying to wound me without my awareness that I was being put through a trial. Once the bond broke, the idea of reclaiming what we once had became impossible. That connection was a rare gift in life that could never be replicated. I can't shake the thought of how different things could have been if she had just confessed to her actions from the beginning, allowing us to end things amicably. In that scenario, I might have been able to pick myself up, heal, and perhaps even open my heart to someone new in the future. But the way things unfolded felt almost malicious, like she aimed to shatter me beyond repair, ensuring that I wouldn't want to pursue a relationship with anyone else simply because she couldn't have me back. It's a diabolical mindset that leaves a heavy weight on my shoulders. One of the hardest pills to swallow was the emotional aftermath of her infidelity. Regardless of how many showers she took or precautions she used, the knowledge that some version of foreign DNA was now part of our shared history invaded my thoughts. It sparked feelings of disgust and betrayal that I could hardly process. Every intimate moment we had shared previously felt tarnished by the betrayal. That first act of unfaithfulness erased the purity of our experiences in an instant. To me, the sanctity of a relationship feels like a tall glass of cold milk. The moment Marie allowed her lips to touch another man's, it was akin to a single drop of ink tainting that milk. While it may appear to remain predominantly white and unblemished at a glance, the reality is that the damage was done. Instead of being upfront about that initial drop, she let me continue drinking, and even added more ink to the mix. This representation isn't just about numbers. In my eyes, Marie has transitioned into something entirely different, a glass of ink with only a drop of milk left. She transformed from a once valued partner into something that now feels devoid of worth, reduced to the status of someone who no longer holds the essence of who we were. In an almost spiteful twist of fate, I find myself wishing that her existence had been altered from the start, that some intervention could have prevented her from ever being in this world to engage in such betrayal. The pain that results from these experiences makes it clear that what many find thrilling or exciting in new relationships serves as a source of profound anxiety for me, a reminder of the heartache that can be caused by betrayal and infidelity. I find myself reflecting on the fluttering sensations I used to feel around Marie. Those butterflies in my stomach were almost overwhelming, to the point of making me nauseous. The experience of liking someone as captivatingly beautiful as Marie intruded upon my personal space in ways that were both thrilling and unnerving. It's important to clarify that this wasn't a matter of low self-esteem. Both Marie and I were outgoing when it came to our interactions with one another. However, beneath our extroverted facades, we were both inherently introverted individuals. Navigating the waters of physical closeness and learning how to kiss was a journey for us. This was the first time I'd ever experienced such intimacy, and it required a certain level of gradual acclimatization. Contrary to popular belief that all teenagers are just driven by hormones and desires, Marie and I took our time. Our physical relationship unfolded slowly, as we grew more comfortable with one another and learned how to connect on a deeper level. This was the kind of experience I had always been taught was ideal, and it was what I genuinely wanted. Marie assured me time and again that she sought the same gradual progression. However, the mere thought of being intimate with someone new now makes me cringe, a sentiment that feels almost overwhelming. Yet, memories of Marie are potent, almost like an antidote to those negative feelings. They evoke emotions that are both powerful and uncomfortable. Each day, I grapple with feelings of shame about being part of this human experience. My life took unexpected turns, and I had envisioned so many beautiful moments ahead of us as a family. Unfortunately, those memories have been tainted, and the future I hoped for will never come to fruition. In the end, I had a genuine love for Carrie, but I reached a point where I had to let her go. Our relationship was never one born from genuine choice, it felt imposed upon us from the very beginning. By adopting her, I thought I was giving her a chance at a better life, and in doing so, I also granted myself that opportunity. I often ponder how things might unfold when the judge eventually asks her if she wants me to adopt her. I imagine it will be a moment filled with all the love we've shared, coming full circle, making things as right as they could possibly be under the circumstances. I accept that I can never truly be her father in the traditional sense. That title belongs to another man who walks around unaware that he has a 6-year-old daughter. Yet, I take pride in knowing that I will always be the only dad she truly knows, someone who is committed to protecting her and providing for her long after any legal obligation has passed. I have made choices to preserve my own sanity, even if those choices have raised questions from others or led to accusations of cruelty. I have done what I felt was necessary to ensure Marie's two biggest victims could stake their claim to something that was never theirs. I acknowledge that I have made mistakes in how I've navigated these tumultuous waters. It's likely I won't realize they were mistakes until much further down the line, but I have always done my best under the circumstances. I intend to provide updates as soon as I can, especially when more issues are resolved. I appreciate everyone's patience during this time, and I will strive to communicate more frequently as my children and I continue to move forward together with peace. In the spirit of keeping everyone updated, and to fulfill my promise of more frequent posts that are shorter in length, I'm writing this update now. I apologize if my earlier posts caused any strain to read or even discomfort, that was never my intention. In response to a question about Rebecca in the comments, I figured it would be helpful to clarify where things stand regarding her role in all of this. Since that fateful day, I have had no interaction with Becca whatsoever. I am unaware of her current involvement in Marie's life or if they've had any contact since everything unfolded. The kids haven't brought up Rebecca, and their silence speaks volumes about the situation. A few weeks after the chaos erupted, I confided in an old friend about the unfolding drama. I chose this friend because his wife is known for being quite the gossip, which gave me a certain comfort. She is also a good friend of mine, so I felt no guilt about using her penchant for sharing information to my advantage. For those who may not know, Becca owns a salon employing 9 people when fully staffed. As word of my situation spread through our friend group, 2 stylists have since left her salon. While I can't definitively say whether they left for better opportunities or as a statement against her role in my marriage's collapse, I can hope that my actions will eventually lead to some form of accountability for her. Once everything is finalized, I plan to share my experiences openly. If that brings her any hardship, so be it. But for now, I must wait to see how everything unfolds. During my recent trip to the grocery store, I unexpectedly encountered Mandy, Marie's sister. It was a moment that stood out to me, as she greeted me with a warm hug and immediately expressed her apologies regarding what her sister had done. She described Marie's actions as both foolish and immoral, acknowledging a sort of collective shame her family felt. In a community where many would likely suggest I sever all ties with anyone linked to the enemy camp, I found myself reflecting on my long-standing friendship with both Mandy and her husband, Doug. This connection prompted me to invite them over for a casual gathering with their children, hoping to create a light-hearted atmosphere by utilizing the pool and firing up the grill. As our families enjoyed the day, Doug took on the role of supervising the kids and managing the grill, while Mandy and I attempted to engage in a serious conversation. We made a concerted effort to keep our discussion private, careful to prevent any of the children from overhearing the sensitive topics we needed to address. Fortunately, the children were wholly absorbed in splashing around in the pool and indulging in delicious food, allowing us the space to converse at length. To summarize the gravity of what we discussed, it became clear that Marie's family was well aware of her infidelity. However, they had been misled by her, who spun a story that minimized her actions. Mandy revealed that Marie had only admitted to having a couple of short-term affairs after the birth of their son, Michael. Naturally, this prompted me to question what exactly constituted a couple in Mandy's eyes. When she replied, suggesting 2 or perhaps 3, I took the opportunity to present the evidence I had compiled, a collection of text messages detailing Marie's interactions with multiple men. As Mandy perused the folder containing those exchanges, I explained to her that our investigation led us to uncover 47 different individuals with whom Marie had engaged in sexual relations since Michael's birth. I made it clear that this number was just the beginning, as we had reason to believe the actual figure was much higher, given that Marie often arranged encounters through various dating apps. Mandy's reaction was one of shock. The realization of her sister's verified infidelities left her momentarily speechless. She expressed an immediate urge to contact their parents to inform them of the truth and to confront Marie directly. As the weight of this revelation settled in, it struck me that Marie's family had not yet learned the truth about paternity, that I was not, in fact, Michael's father. The emotions in the air were palpable. It was difficult to determine who was more upset, Mandy or myself. Doug had to pause his grilling duties to comfort Mandy, who was visibly shaken, tears spilling down her cheeks as she offered me repeated apologies for her sister's conduct. In the midst of this, Doug managed a stunned expression, patting me on the back while ensuring his wife was okay, and suggested we go out for drinks later in the week to unwind. Despite my soon-to-be ex-wife's questionable morals, I found solace in the fact that her family and their connections appeared genuine and compassionate. I remained cautious about how much trust one would extend to them, though. I took the time to explain to Mandy how I came to learn of the paternity results, which left her equally astonished. In our conversation, she remarked that she wished I had confronted Becca, Marie's accomplice in deceit, more aggressively. Curiosity led me to ask Mandy for her opinion on Becca, and she opened up about her disdain for her sister's friend. A few years older than Marie and me, Mandy recounted her memories of Becca, sharing how she often caught her stealing makeup from her room with no remorse. Her descriptions painted a picture of Becca as manipulative, always stirring the pot when it came to drama. Mandy recounted her attempts to act as a role model for Becca after her parents' divorce, only to be met with ingratitude and defiance. Then, I posed a question about Marie's initial intention to have Becca as her maid of honor. Although Mandy didn't provide a definitive answer, her frustrated stream of consciousness made it clear that she was unaware of Marie's reasoning behind that choice. As I filled her in on various messages and letters exchanged between Marie and me, which I had shared through our lawyers, Mandy expressed her disbelief. She stated that their parents had raised them with strong values and could not fathom Marie's current actions. Mandy reminisced about how Marie had claimed she had never desired to be with anyone except me, even back in high school. This revelation prompted me to wonder if Marie had been deceiving herself or if her feelings had genuinely changed over time. Regardless of the answer, I firmly believe that true love can't coexist with infidelity. Either Marie's love for me was never authentic, or it had withered away long before I had any inkling of the truth. Marie has made the claim that her heart now, and has always belonged to me. This is something I've heard repeatedly over the years, and it carries an air of sincerity that now feels hollow to me. I question whether she was even capable of genuine love. Not that it matters now, of course. If her heart truly did belong to me, I would consider selling it off for a transplant, aiming for the highest bidder, despite knowing it's defective. After lunch, the kids continued playing, which gave me the chance to have an in-depth conversation with Doug and Mandy. While I was fetching ice cream for the kids, Mandy filled Doug in on everything that had transpired. When I returned with their ice cream, I noticed tears shimmering in Doug's eyes. He embraced me with a long, brotherly hug before I settled back down. His first question was about the guy I caught Marie with and how much damage I had inflicted on him. The only detail I could share was that by the time I left, the guy was unconscious and his left lower eyelid had a sagging appearance reminiscent of a hound dog due to the beating he received. I was relieved that no police had contacted me, which indicated that his friend must have decided not to take him to the authorities. However, I knew from experience that the orbital bone fracture he likely sustained would require surgical intervention, and I could rest easy knowing I wouldn't be stuck with the medical bills. Doug commented that I should have just killed the guy. I responded that if Marie and Becca hadn't jumped on me to restrain me, I might have lost control and gone further. However, I was ultimately glad I didn't. Doug then inquired if anyone had any idea about the identity of the father of Marie's child. I explained that Marie had been involved with far too many men to pinpoint any one father, but I assured him that the search for the child's paternity would accelerate once the divorce and any related civil proceedings were finalized. They expressed satisfaction in knowing that Marie would face significant consequences in the divorce settlement. They were also pleased to hear that therapy had been beneficial for all three of us. I mentioned that I was eager for Marie to return to work so she could contribute to child support and cover any civil fines she might accrue, which led to a shared laugh between us. Doug quipped that if paternity fraud were a criminal offense, Marie would be facing the death penalty. I added that Marie might as well have committed maternity fraud, because any woman capable of doing what she did didn't deserve the title of mother. About an hour after they had left, my phone erupted with calls and texts. The caller ID displayed that both of Marie's parents were trying to reach me, alongside several messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Then Mandy called, and when I answered, I could hear a cacophony of shouting in the background. Mandy stepped outside, away from the chaos, to inform me that she had shared the truth with her parents. I learned that her father was currently tossing Marie's belongings into her car, while her mother was in tears, expressing her disappointment and shame over what Marie had become. The pain in her voice was palpable as she lamented the failure of raising a daughter who had made such egregious choices. I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony of a mother calling her child a disappointment. It felt like Marie had indeed boarded a train to Horseville and had stopped at every station along the way. Amidst the shouting, I could hear Marie's voice, crying and pleading, insisting she had nowhere to go. Instead of reveling in her misfortune, I felt a pang of guilt thinking about the children. I had no issue with Carrie and Michael staying at their grandparents' house, but any other options I could think of where Marie might end up were unacceptable. There was no way I would let them stay with her if she ended up with Rebecca. Even if Marie somehow managed to get a hotel room, I didn't trust her judgment not to bring some random guy into the situation. Though I was relieved that her family was finally aware of a fraction of the truth, I couldn't help but worry about the visitation issues this might cause. If Marie didn't secure a stable and safe living arrangement, the court would inevitably limit her to supervised visitation. The thought of her only being able to see the kids for an hour or two every other weekend was disheartening, but I knew this was a consequence of the pit she had dug for herself with her lies. Whether she ended up in a homeless shelter or worse didn't elicit any sympathy from me. As I remained on the phone with Mandy, Marie suddenly came outside and asked if I was on the line. Mandy asked me what I wanted her to tell Marie, and I probably shouldn't have said what I truly felt. But before I could reconsider, Marie snatched the phone from Mandy and began pleading with me. She posed the question of why I seemed so determined to ruin her life, a question laden with confusion and perhaps a hint of desperation. My response was simple and unembellished: it was precisely because she had destroyed mine. She pressed, suggesting that forgiveness was the key to reclaiming my life. I told her that the life I once had was extinguished, that it had never truly existed in the first place, all thanks to her web of deceit. In a moment of vulnerability, she swore again that she loved me. I retorted, bluntly, that the only love she harbored in this world was for herself. She claimed that the people she had been with meant nothing to her, but I countered her assertion. I reminded her that if those relationships had been insignificant, she wouldn't have put everything on the line repeatedly, risking not just our bond but also the stability of her family. The conversation turned confrontational when she demanded to know why I had exposed the truth about her to her sister and parents. I shot back, asking why she had been forthright with them about everything, especially the truth of my relationship with her child. Her response was a flurry of curses, declaring I wasn't Car's father. I fired back, asserting my role as Car's dad, a title I would carry for life. I emphasized that at the very least, she owed her family the truth. In a moment of raw honesty, she lamented that her parents were disowning her and planning to kick her out. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow, admitting that her plight brought me a sense of happiness and an urge to amplify her suffering. Her declaration of love for me and her bewilderment at my perceived cruelty only fueled the fire. I told her that the question of my cruelty should have been one she asked herself 6 years prior when the consequences of her actions had first begun to unfold. I knew she felt remorse, not out of genuine regret but because she was losing everything, and the truth was finally surfacing. I explained that her actions had rendered her deserving of scorn, of being ostracized, and that what she was facing from her family was exactly what she had earned. I thought of Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter, suggesting she would be a perfect candidate for a modern-day version of that shame. 3 days later, Nadia called to inform me that Marie's lawyer had reached out to arrange another meeting. Despite my reluctance to see her or engage with her, I recognized that her newfound homelessness could significantly impact judicial decisions regarding custody. Upon sitting down at that meeting, Marie's attorney revealed that she had been living out of her car since her parents had cast her aside. I couldn't help but wonder why she hadn't sought refuge with Rebecca, who had been complicit in her situation. Instead of answering, Marie shifted the conversation, asking if there was any possibility of her returning home or if we could consider marriage counseling. My response was firm: she needed to request permission from her parents to return home. The home I shared with her and our children was off limits to what I deemed a shameful presence. I made it clear that she and Rebecca should stay far away. In terms of marriage counseling, I suggested she was free to pursue that with anyone foolish enough to marry her next, but I confidently asserted that her years of irresponsibility had rendered her incapable of remaining faithful to anyone. Her lawyer interjected, taking offense to my choice of words and the severity of my comments. I retorted, dismissing him as a money-hungry lawyer for representing someone like her, questioning if she was covering her legal fees through OnlyFans or resorting to other questionable means. Nadia's calming hand on my shoulder attempted to diffuse the tension. She asked us to maintain civility, to which I agreed, remarking that there was only so much of my ex's fabrications and justifications I could tolerate. Nadia promised to expedite the meeting, and when we resumed, I fixed a steely glare on Marie and her attorney, my silence indicating my disdain and unwillingness to engage further. They both had the option to attend the meeting themselves, but Nadia felt it was necessary to take the reins. She initiated the session again, directing her attention toward Marie and inquiring whether she had sought or received any form of therapy. Marie dismissed the idea, claiming that between her ongoing physical therapy sessions and various obligations, she simply didn't have the time. Additionally, she stated that financial constraints were an issue, as her insurance would not cover the cost of therapy. Nadia, undeterred by Marie's excuses, took it a step further by asking if we would cover the expenses. Would Marie be willing to attend a few therapy sessions on her own? The suddenness of Nadia's proposal caught me off guard, my head whipped around toward her with such speed that I genuinely feared I might hurt myself. In that tense moment, Nadia sensed my shock and quickly kicked me under the table to signal that she had everything under control. At that point, Marie's lawyer intervened, firmly stating that regardless of who would be footing the bill, Marie would only see a therapist of her choosing. Nadia nodded in agreement, but emphasized the importance of therapy for Marie's emotional processing, suggesting that it could ultimately aid her in becoming a better mother in the future. Although I remained skeptical of Nadia's rationale behind making such a suggestion, I allowed her to continue advocating for Marie. Marie's counsel assured us they would discuss the possibility and provide an answer at a later date. My lawyer, though technically on the opposing side, expressed her commitment to ensuring that any woman involved in cases she handled received the support they needed. The way she articulated her intent was so persuasive that I felt an unsettling shift in my own legal representative's loyalties, leading me to question if she was truly on my side. Then came the moment when Marie suggested that we could engage in family counseling. At this, I instinctively kicked Nadia under the table, conveying my disapproval of the idea. There was absolutely no way I would agree to that kind of arrangement. Nadia, unfazed, kicked me back, her determination evident as she explained that if Marie attended several sessions and the therapist believed it would be beneficial, we might consider family counseling down the line. I recognized that Nadia had a strategic reason for her proposal, but I wished she had communicated her intentions with me beforehand. I had no doubt that I would eventually uncover the purpose behind her tactics, yet I was left perplexed until the meeting came to a close. Afterward, I turned to Marie, wanting to understand her perspective on the situation she was facing. I asked if the chaos in her life was truly worth all the fleeting, meaningless encounters she had indulged in. Deep down, I was desperate to know if those experiences were worth sacrificing a loving husband and potentially losing custody of her children. As tears welled up in her eyes, Marie began to cry, seemingly genuinely distressed. She ultimately responded with a soft no, admitting that her choices had led to severe consequences. I pressed further, inquiring whether she truly felt any shame about her actions. I knew she was filled with regret, if nothing else, for being caught, but I sought to understand if she felt ashamed about the prospect of others discovering the sordid details of her indiscretions. Marie confessed that she felt immense shame, especially now that her family was aware of her situation. I questioned her on whether she genuinely believed she could keep her secrets hidden from her family forever. She expressed a hope that the truth wouldn't come out until she was back at work and had secured a place of her own, but she acknowledged that it was likely only a matter of time before everything would be revealed. In a moment of vulnerability, she apologized for the pain she had caused me, insisting that she never intended to hurt me. I responded candidly, telling her that it wasn't just a matter of hurt, her betrayal had destroyed me. I described how, every single day, I was consumed by an unrelenting pain that permeated my entire being. This pain resided not only in my heart but also echoed in my joints and muscles. I shared how over-the-counter pain relief offered no reprieve, and I felt as though her betrayal had poisoned my soul, causing physical manifestations of anguish throughout my body. On good days, I felt numb, while on bad days, I was overwhelmed by tension and despair, sometimes waking up inexplicably sore. Seeing the anguish in my expression only made her cry harder, and I demanded to know what I had ever done to deserve such a profound betrayal. As I pressed her for answers, she could only cry in response, her tears a reflection of the pain she had caused. I then asked her what she believed was a fitting consequence for her actions, not what she wished for, but what she thought someone in her position genuinely deserved after shattering another person's life. Her tears flowed uncontrollably at that question. I reached a point of frustration with her emotional response and the lack of substantive answers. When the meeting finally concluded, Marie's lawyer attempted to usher her out of the office as she repeatedly begged me for forgiveness. I firmly instructed her to go home and get her life back on track somewhere else, stating that we were done discussing anything further. After they finally left the premises, I turned to Nadia, demanding an explanation for her suggestion that I cover Marie's therapy sessions. She explained that taking such an action would likely be viewed positively by the court because it demonstrated a willingness to seek help and improve one's situation. However, it was evident that Marie was struggling significantly. Her mental state appeared unstable. The fact that a professional had recommended or insisted that she be hospitalized for her own well-being was alarming. Lai expressed her worry, saying that it is unfortunately quite easy for someone to get institutionalized, even if just for a short period, perhaps overnight. By allowing Marie to meet with a mental health professional, there was a glimmer of hope that she might receive the assistance she truly needed. Moreover, this could potentially work in Lai's favor, as observing Marie's distressed and frazzled condition could shed light on her inability to cope with life's challenges. Lai reflected on the deep sense of betrayal she felt. Marie had deceived her for over 6 years regarding crucial aspects of her life, and therefore, she felt no qualms about withholding her true intentions for encouraging Marie to see a therapist. If Marie believed that family therapy might be a possibility for her to comply, that would be acceptable to Lai. After all, Marie had a knack for creating her own downfall, and Lai secretly hoped that this pattern would persist. While this update was lengthier than intended, it was necessary to convey the important developments. On a more positive note, the children were thriving. Michael had taken up baseball and was excelling as a pitcher, given that he was the tallest child on his team. Standing on the mound, he performed well even when faced with a larger strike zone than his peers. Next week, Lai planned to take him along with Doug and his 2 sons to watch the White Sox face the Tigers, which everyone was looking forward to. Carrie continued to shine, both in beauty and sweetness. She adored playing in the pool, and having friends over with their children to share these moments was a delightful enhancement to their lives. Lai was determined to raise her children to be active and engaged, steering them away from becoming too absorbed in their devices. She wanted them to embrace life fully without feeling out of place in society, even if that meant they would sometimes be viewed as a little quirky. Gratitude flooded Lai's heart as she reflected on the kindness and support she had received. Each day presented a new challenge, but knowing she had a network of people willing to back her provided immeasurable comfort. In addition, a few individuals had been under the impression that Mandy and her parents were aware of Marie's infidelity before Lai was made aware. In fact, Lai had disclosed the truth about catching Marie cheating to her parents on the same morning he informed his own. At that time, they were completely uninformed about Marie's affairs, and it wasn't until later that Lai discovered the extent of Marie's betrayals involving multiple men, including the father of one of their friends. It was Lai who ultimately informed Marie that he was not the biological father of Ka, which led him to believe that Marie had shared this information with her family, as her father had referenced other men. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on Lai, who cherished Marie's family and wanted to safeguard them from further hurt. He had no intention of adding to their pain or dragging them into the mess. Marie had confirmed to her family that she had only been involved in a few short-term affairs, which was a far cry from the truth. Lai had been motivated to shield Carrie from the full extent of the family turmoil, hoping that Marie would quietly communicate with her relatives about what had transpired. He had severed contact with Marie's family and instead communicated through mutual friends Jessica and Nadia until running into Mandy, with whom he hadn't had a substantial conversation in a long while. It then became apparent that Marie had hoped to keep things hidden from everyone involved, leading to further confusion and chaos. In a final update noted a few weeks ago, Lai logged into this anonymous account for the first time in nearly a year. To his surprise, there were numerous messages and comments checking in on his and the children's well-being. A strong urge washed over him to ignore them, to simply sign out and vanish, as he had made significant strides in establishing stability in his life and that of his children. Reflecting on the past seemed counterproductive. However, the supportive advice he had received from Reddit throughout his darkest times was invaluable. Acknowledging the kindness of those who had guided him through a challenging period, Lai felt a profound need to share this final update as a gesture of gratitude to those who had helped him navigate the tumultuous terrain he had been thrust into. Recognizing that it had been quite some time since his last post, he understood that most readers might have forgotten his earlier updates, which was entirely understandable. For those who still followed his story, he intended to provide links and a summary for clarity. This would be a lengthy recounting, but it was necessary to capture everything that had transpired over the months and how events had evolved in ways he had never anticipated when he last shared his experience. My soon-to-be ex-wife, Marie, faced a significant turning point in her life when her parents disowned her. The catalyst for this dramatic shift was her failure to be honest with them about an essential truth: I am not the biological father of our daughter, Carrie. This unfortunate revelation came shortly after I had caught Marie cheating. On that same morning, I informed her parents of my discovery regarding her infidelity, which added to the already complicated situation we were grappling with. While I was open about the betrayal, Marie had not been forthcoming with her parents about the nature of her actions. The man I found her with was merely one in a series of affairs that had taken place over the course of our relationship. With nowhere else to turn after being disowned, Marie found herself living out of her car. This stark reality was a harsh contrast to the life we once shared. Meanwhile, I was navigating the legal complexities involved in adopting Carrie, especially now that the court had ruled that I am not her biological father. My attorney, Nadia, was working tirelessly on this matter, and she held the belief that it would be beneficial for Marie to seek help from a mental health professional of her choice. In light of this, Nadia suggested 2 local psychiatric practices to Marie's lawyer, making it clear that we would cover the costs of her therapy sessions. However, I had serious reservations about the decision to financially support Marie in any way that might aid her, particularly given the emotionally charged circumstances surrounding our split. A crucial takeaway from this experience is the importance of listening to your lawyer, regardless of your feelings toward the situation or individuals involved. In a swift turn of events, Marie chose one of the recommended psychiatrists, who immediately identified signs of mental instability. Out of concern for her well-being, the psychiatrist made the decision to commit Marie to the local psychiatric ward for overnight observation. What began as a single night turned into an extended stay, lasting several months as Marie underwent psychiatric care. Due to confidentiality regulations in the medical field, I was never privy to her actual diagnosis. However, her attorney mentioned that each time he visited her, she appeared heavily sedated and unresponsive. Those initial months of Marie being in care contributed to delays in the finalization of our divorce and child custody hearings. Fortunately, since Marie was not contesting the divorce, her attorney could represent her in this matter, allowing me to continue my efforts to gain custody of Carrie. Despite the sadness that had permeated my life during this tumultuous time, hearing the judge question Carrie and listening to her innocent, heartfelt responses filled me with immense joy. Carrie remained blissfully unaware that the court had previously declared me not her father. The situation struck her as amusing when asked if she wished for me to be her daddy. That moment of connection and pride as I reassured her of my love was unforgettable, especially when she hugged me tightly, marking the first time as her adopted father. Michael, a friend, was there to witness this pivotal moment, and I found comfort in his presence. Surprisingly, I felt a sense of gratitude that Marie was not there to disrupt the occasion. Neither Michael nor Carrie fully understood the complexities of the situation, but what truly mattered was that Carrie was now legally recognized as my daughter, despite our lack of biological ties. The moment I discovered Marie's infidelity effectively extinguished any lingering love I had for her, but the fear that I might carry that emotional burden onto my relationship with Carrie weighed heavily on me. I was relieved to discover that my love for her remained intact. It is a harsh reality that if paternity is significant enough for the legal system to require a man to support a child that is biologically his, it should also be relevant when it comes to accepting a child who is not his own. Nevertheless, I desperately needed Carrie in my life. I had already endured too much loss and heartbreak, and she deserved a father who had always loved her, even if not by blood. I will be honest, a small part of my soul will always feel broken because Carrie is not my biological daughter. Accepting that truth and the emotional turmoil it brought was devastating. However, I have committed myself to being the best parent possible within this circumstance. I truly believe that the time and love given to children far outweigh any material possessions a parent could offer. Apart from Marie's mental health issues, there were no substantial reasons to delay the finalization of our divorce. Marie would receive no financial support from me, and even her own attorney acknowledged that Marie's current situation severely limited her chances of gaining custody if she ever managed to leave the psychiatric facility. If she could find a safe and stable place to live, that would allow her the opportunity to petition the court for some form of visitation rights and potentially even custody of the children. The court had appointed a legal aid attorney to ensure that Marie was fully aware of the proceedings and capable of making informed decisions regarding her case. Her lawyer successfully guided her through the process of signing the divorce papers, ensuring that multiple witnesses were present and that the documents were properly notarized. A week later, I was required to appear in court alongside Nadia, where our attorneys engaged with the judge to resolve various outstanding issues related to the divorce. It was a tense yet pivotal moment, and 2 weeks after that court appearance, I found myself legally divorced. This marked the end of what I recognized as the biggest mistake of my life, something that I had clearly wasted precious time on. Although I should have celebrated my newfound freedom, the act of signing the divorce papers felt more like the final nail in the coffin of our marriage, a significant yet strangely anticlimactic moment that didn't bring the sense of relief I expected. It was striking how firmly Marie's family stood by their decision to disown her once the truth about her actions came to light. They seemed determined to maintain their distance, likely motivated by a desire to stay on my good side in hopes of retaining some level of contact with the kids. Despite the fact that they were aware their daughter was in a psychiatric ward, they never made an effort to visit her. I didn't reach out either, but it was clear from our conversations that her parents were profoundly disappointed and disgusted by her behavior. They seemed embarrassed and ashamed, wishing to distance themselves from the knowledge of the choices Marie had made. I could empathize with them, knowing what Marie had put herself through was tough for me as well. It made me ashamed to admit that I had ever been intimate with her. Meanwhile, Mandy made sure to share details about Marie's deeds with others, and Rebecca did the same, creating a ripple effect throughout our social circle. Within just a month, word had spread regarding Marie's years of infidelity and sexual promiscuity, and many people were eager to confront her if they ever crossed paths with her again. The situation was humiliating for me, knowing that everyone was aware of how gullibly I had trusted Marie. In any relationship, trust is fundamental, and up until that point, she had given me no reason to doubt her. It wasn't until a few months before I uncovered the truth that the thought of her infidelity had even crossed my mind. In hindsight, I realize I had overlooked several red flags, but Marie had been skilled at hiding her actions, making it difficult to connect the dots. Perhaps I should have put my foot down regarding her girls' nights out, especially after her depression began to lift, just as a matter of principle. The night she stayed out all night was unusual. In fact, it was the first time it had ever happened. She would typically call to let me know if she was running late, even if it was only by a few minutes, so this absence left me genuinely worried for her safety. Many might view me as naive or blind for not seeing the signs sooner. Marie's approach was strategic. By keeping her interactions strictly physical and minimizing the number of times she engaged with each man, she left no obvious traces for me to follow. She was not overly attached to her phone, nor did she protect it with an unusual level of secrecy, which made the absence of suspicion even easier for me. In my mind, she was the perfect wife and mother, devoted and loving, and it turned out I wasn't the only one who had been deceived. A number of friends expressed their shock upon learning about her disloyalty, assuring me that they would have informed me had they been privy to the truth. Like me, they had been completely in the dark. If Marie had showcased her infidelity in a glaringly obvious way, it might have been a different story. Yet, the persona she presented to the world was a complete fabrication. After everything that happened, it became abundantly clear that no one wanted to associate with her anymore, and they were indifferent to her well-being. They cared little about whether she remained in the psychiatric ward for an extended period, which was a troubling reality. The issue was that this lack of contact with Marie left us blindsided. Nobody alerted us when the hospital determined to release her. Laws surrounding patient confidentiality meant that the hospital could not divulge any information to us. I have no clue whether she successfully convinced the doctors that she was well enough to leave or if they felt their efforts had reached their limits in terms of helping her. The hospital released her one Tuesday just before noon. Somehow, she managed to navigate from the hospital to her car, which was parked at her lawyer's office behind his house. From there, she drove off, and a new chapter began. Drove to the kids' school, a sense of urgency propelling me forward after receiving the unsettling news that Marie was there causing a disturbance. The school staff informed me that she was not permitted to see or check the kids out of school. Her reaction was anything but calm. In fact, she made such a scene that the school felt compelled to call me. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I instructed them to contact the police and assured them I would arrive as quickly as possible. As I hurried to my car, I dialed Mandy, wanting to update her on the chaos unfolding. I let her know her baby sister was no longer the guest at her Airbnb on Insanity Island. It was unclear whether Marie had been released or had simply walked away, but I promised to find out once I reached the school. Mandy said she would inform our parents and Doug to keep them in the loop about the situation. When I finally arrived at the school, the scene was surreal. 2 police cars and an ambulance were parked out front, their lights flashing and creating a sense of alarm. I maneuvered into a parking spot, exited my vehicle, and approached the closest officer. After identifying myself as Marie's ex-husband, he guided me through a side entrance that led into the school cafeteria. I felt a wave of relief wash over me when I learned that no one had told Michael or Carrie about the turmoil occurring in the front office, and thankfully, the school day had not been interrupted. Inside the cafeteria, I found Marie seated at a table, her demeanor fraught with tension. As soon as she spotted me, she attempted to rise, demanding to see her children. The officers intervened, preventing her from coming any closer. I turned to the police and asked whether they had contacted the mental health ward of the hospital to confirm her release. They explained that, while the hospital had restrictions on sharing certain details without a warrant, they could disclose that Marie had been released under her own volition. Her emotional state quickly escalated as she began to cry, insisting again that she wanted to see our children. I firmly told the officer that I had full custody and that there was no way I was allowing her to see them in such an unstable condition. In a frantic outburst, Marie yelled at me that the kids were the last two people who still cared about her. I replied that, while that may be true, they were just children and did not fully comprehend the implications of her situation. The officer chuckled softly at my remark but quickly regained his serious demeanor. Marie tried to approach me again, and once more the officer intervened, holding her back. She lamented that she hadn't seen our children in months and that they were her only source of strength while she navigated her tumultuous mental health challenges. I expressed my indifference to her struggles, emphasizing that I could not expose our children to her lies and emotional turmoil. I decided it was time to take action and informed the officer that I wanted to file a restraining order against her, directing her to stay away from both me and the kids. He agreed to initiate the necessary paperwork, though he explained that a judge would ultimately determine whether a restraining order was warranted. He then turned to Marie, letting her know that, due to my decision to deny her access to the kids, the principal had already been informed, and she needed to leave the school premises immediately. The officer added that she would not be allowed to return unless she could present a court order granting her visitation rights. To my surprise, Marie did not escalate the situation further. Perhaps she realized that her current tactics would be ineffective. She grabbed her belongings, her purse and keys, and was escorted to her car by an officer. Once she drove away, I collaborated with the officer on the restraining order form using his tablet while we spoke with the principal about the events that had unfolded. Soon after, it was time for the kids to be dismissed from school. I loaded Michael and Carrie into the car, ready to take them home. However, as I drove a couple of miles away from the school, something caught my eye. I thought I spotted Marie's car exiting a nearby fast food restaurant just after we passed by it. I quickly took the next right turn, followed by another, maneuvering until I found myself on the same street from which we had just come. There it was, Marie's car ahead. I accelerated, wanting to determine exactly what she was up to. She seemed completely unaware that I had managed to position myself behind her vehicle. It was clear Marie was searching for someone, and I could see that a particular person was watching her movements intently. Fortunately, the kids did not recognize her car as we trailed behind it. Thankfully, a suggestion from a Reddit user had prompted me to install front and rear cameras with audio recorders in my vehicle, ensuring I would have documentation of any interactions moving forward. I had installed rear cameras with audio recorders in my vehicles, which turned out to be crucial in gathering the evidence I needed to demonstrate that Marie was stalking both me and the kids. Despite being warned by law enforcement to keep her distance, she continued her unsettling behavior. After compiling the footage showing Marie's persistent attempts to follow us, I went straight to the police station. I presented everything to the magistrate, who reviewed the video of Marie waiting for us to pass by, making her move only to lose sight of us a moment later. The magistrate assured me that the evidence would be submitted to the judge in my case, and that I could expect to hear about the restraining order soon. Within 2 days, while I was at work, I received a call from the police. They informed me that the restraining order had been officially filed and served that very morning. The order stipulated that Marie was to maintain a distance of at least 200 yards from me and the children at all times, and she was strictly prohibited from contacting us in any way, except through her attorney. The police instructed me to reach out to them immediately if she violated any terms of the restraining order. I felt a sense of relief that I now had legal protection on my side, but deep down, I was fully prepared for Marie to disregard the order and try to contact me or the kids anyway. To my surprise, however, we didn't hear anything from Marie in the weeks that followed. Her sister reported that Marie hadn't reached out to her or her parents either. I had anticipated that Marie might look for some form of legal assistance to pursue partial custody, but no one ever contacted Nadia regarding that. As 2 months passed without any communication or incidents, I found myself feeling a mixture of unease and cautious optimism. The absence of turmoil was unsettling, yet it was also a welcome break from the chaos that had plagued our lives. Approximately 3 months later, I returned home to discover a large manila envelope resting in my mailbox. Its address was handwritten, and the return address simply read, Sydney, Australia, featuring voided Australian stamps. The mystery of who could be sending me something from so far away made my heart race. Inside, I found an exceedingly long letter from Marie. She attempted to explain her current situation and reassured me that she had no intention of returning. Upon reading the letter, I was left stunned, not just by the distance it had traveled, but also by the content of her words. The things she articulated reflected a deeply disturbing and self-justifying rationale that she seemed to believe allowed her to find peace. Her letter served to fill in many gaps regarding her mental state and the experiences that led her to such a pivotal point in her life. Marie detailed how she suffered a nervous breakdown during her initial therapy sessions. For the first couple of months in the hospital, she had been heavily sedated and was prescribed various antidepressants and antipsychotic medications. She candidly shared that, during her darkest moments in the hospital, she just wanted to succumb to the despair, feeling as though giving up was the only option. However, through therapy and group discussions, she began to confront her issues, trying to understand the reasons behind her actions. As she spoke of her time in therapy, she mentioned how the other participants viewed her with a mix of pity and disbelief, many of them coming from backgrounds rife with abuse, addiction, and violence. Marie's life, in contrast, was relatively sheltered, and the realization of how she had squandered her opportunities and relationships hit her hard. This epiphany triggered another breakdown. The first one originated from confronting her past, and the second stemmed from the terror of facing an uncertain future. The letter then took a twisted turn, where Marie attempted to evoke sympathy for her feelings of loss and heartache. She had the audacity to claim that what upset her most when I discovered her infidelity was the knowledge that I no longer loved her, nor would I ever again. Her reasoning suggested that whenever guilt crept in, she convinced herself that my love depended on my ignorance of her indiscretions. In her mind, it was essential for her that I love her, despite the betrayal. It was almost laughable, but it also hurt to consider that she genuinely believed her claims. The moment I saw her with another man, all affection for her faded instantly. She had effectively destroyed everything between us in that single moment. Marie insisted that her past actions didn't diminish her love for me, claiming that her infidelity with other men didn't affect her feelings. I found it challenging to fathom how she could have treated our relationship so callously if she had truly cared for me. In an almost surreal twist, she referred to me as her best friend and soulmate, making the entire situation even more complex and difficult to process. It was a strange combination of anger, disbelief, and sorrow as I absorbed everything she had poured out in her letter. She expressed a complete lack of interest in forging any romantic connections with anyone other than me. In her words, having men openly approach her with the sole intent of satisfying their primal urges, without any regard for the emotional fallout, was exhilarating. She admitted that, after straying a few times, her friend Becca had convinced her that humans were never actually meant to be monogamous. She mentioned that she would have welcomed the idea of me engaging with other women, but she was fully aware that I would never actually go for that. The thrill of being able to casually hook up with some guy she might meet while running errands, then returning home to prepare dinner, made her role as a mother and a wife seem less dreary and routine. She attempted to quantify the situation, claiming that I somehow stood to gain from her having these other sexual partners because it supposedly enhanced her abilities as a lover when we were together. I could not fathom that perspective. In truth, I would have preferred a completely unexciting, dull marriage to being with someone who acted like a sorority girl flitting from one guy to the next, having little discernment about who she engaged with. What kind of man would be willing to sleep with any woman who threw herself at him? Such men seem utterly devoid of worth. If you truly feel the need to be adventurous and explore your sexuality, that is your prerogative. Many people today live their lives exactly that way. However, the time to engage in that type of exploration is well before you have children, long before you enter into marriage, and certainly before you reach the point of infidelity that results in a stranger child being passed off as your husband's. If your quest to experience life and indulge in your desires transforms you into someone whom only the most desperate individual would contemplate committing to, then so be it. If, at any moment during our relationship, Marie had approached me and expressed a desire to break up in order to indulge in sexual escapades with random men she met, I would have been completely at ease with that. Such a revelation would have shown me that she lacked the moral compass, loyalty, and reliability that I sought in a life partner. Had she revealed her true self while we were dating, much heartache could have been avoided. I would not have been concerned with who or how many men she slept with, as long as I was not one of them. She was either unworthy of my time and affection, or she became so through her unforgivable actions. Just as she cannot erase those experiences, I am powerless to turn back the clock and prevent her from entering my life. Words hold little weight when actions speak so loudly. Her choices have shown that she is unworthy of anyone's attention, let alone love. I envision her future, where she becomes a fleeting romantic encounter for random patrons at some dive bar, allowing anyone tipsy enough to find her appealing to have brief moments of intimacy, offering little more than a temporary escape. She penned a heartfelt note expressing her sorrow upon receiving the court petition indicating that I was removing my name from our child's birth certificate. Marie acknowledged that she could see why I could no longer bear to even look at her after everything that transpired. Our daughter became a painful reminder of those betrayals. What stung her even more, she confessed, was receiving my petition to adopt Carrie as my own daughter. To her, this gesture symbolized that, while I could never again offer her a second chance, I had enough capacity for love to provide that opportunity for the very child born out of her unfaithfulness. She admitted to grappling with feelings of jealousy toward Carrie, knowing that her own children would grow up enjoying all the moments and privileges she had taken for granted. The thought of significant life events occurring without her presence devastated her. She could envision snapshots shared on social media, serving as constant reminders of what she missed, and she felt as though she had been stabbed in the heart. Her words laid bare her profound selfishness. She couldn't prioritize my well-being, nor could she even put her own children first. Yet she raged against the reality that monumental experiences in her kids' lives would unfold without her to witness them, tormenting herself with the thought of what she would miss out on. She explained that after her release following the events at the school that day, she spent that night attempting to reconnect with old friends. Unfortunately, the few people who chose to speak with her were brutally honest about their feelings. They made it clear that they wanted nothing to do with her, most acted as if they didn't even recognize her, completely ignoring her attempts at conversation. There were a few who sternly warned her that if they ever discovered she'd been involved with their husbands or boyfriends, she would face severe consequences. It became painfully apparent to her that her hometown had turned against her. Many of her former colleagues, including her boss, were aware of her past, and as a result, she realized there was no chance of returning to her previous job. During that time, the auto insurance of the other driver involved in the accident had been providing her with a decent monthly check that allowed her to cover her living expenses. But after she was incarcerated, everything changed. She had to discontinue her physical therapy sessions, and the insurance company deemed the case related to the accident and her injuries as closed. With finances dwindling and no way to secure employment quickly enough to be near her children, she found herself in a desperate situation. To make ends meet, she resorted to pawning a few belongings while simultaneously searching for jobs online. It was during her online job hunt that she met a man from Australia. Their conversation spanned several days, and he eventually invited her to visit him. By this point, she had been contemplating cashing in her 401k, despite the looming fear of facing a hefty tax penalty at the end of the year. The invitation to Australia catalyzed her decision to cash in her retirement savings, a risky move but one that felt necessary. She described the guy as really nice and mentioned that he had a son who needed a mother figure. Unfortunately, the child would be getting a version of a mother that resembled Joan Crawford, and he would end up with her as his stepmother. She noted that the man had no idea about her past actions and the extent of what she was capable of. He was now her problem. With plans to become an Australian citizen, she intended to avoid paying the IRS, effectively ensuring that she would no longer be a burden on anyone in her past. This was the last communication she had with anyone from her old life, and she hoped it would be the final one. There was a part of her that half-joked, wondering if she had mistakenly thought Australia was founded as a penal colony and assumed it was something related to penile. Regardless, if it meant that she could stay far away from her, that was fine by her. While it may seem harsh, she expressed sympathy for the people of Australia who now potentially faced yet another toxic individual entering their society. It was a sad reality for the citizens who have had to deal with the consequences of generations of reckless actions. Though she felt a sense of relief that this chapter of her life was over, a dark humor surfaced about the situation. She offered thoughts and prayers to Australia, suggesting they may need to stock up on their firearms as a protective measure. With a propensity for psychotic behavior and untreated conditions, it was likely she could strain the country's already burdened healthcare system. Although she wished for her absence, there was a lingering concern over what might happen if she were to return, especially with the possibility of being arrested for tax evasion, a situation that could lead to a sentence of time served in federal prison, ideally sealing the deal on her leaving for good. Through this tumultuous experience, a therapist played a crucial role in helping her manage her emotions, particularly her anger. Despite outward appearances, her therapist highlighted a key revelation during a particularly intense session. For an extended period, she realized that her anger was directed inward more than it was toward Marie. While she had always assumed that all her resentment was aimed at Marie for her deceit and betrayal, the truth was far different. She held herself to a higher ethical standard and found herself in a cycle of self-loathing because she was incapable of understanding why she had made such poor choices. Marie's actions might have been deceitful and harmful, but at the end of the day, it was she who had made the decision to enter into that relationship. Looking back, she felt certain that her life would have been better had she never loved Marie. It was a sentiment echoed in her disdain for the poet Lord Alfred Tennyson, whose perspectives she found misguided. As time progressed, people began to ask about Rebecca, and through the grapevine, she discovered that after Marie was kicked out of her parents' house, she indeed sought refuge with Rebecca. Marie's assumption seemed to be that Rebecca owed her hospitality, especially after Marie had contributed to the unraveling of their marriage. However, it became clear that Rebecca felt she had unintentionally enabled Marie to pursue her own desires without realizing the full extent of the harm it would cause to those around her. Rebecca's role in unraveling my marriage was a hot topic, sparking some incredibly charged debates. The discussions escalated quickly, and while I can't say for certain who came out on top, I do know that the fallout was severe. Our friendship took a nosedive, ending in an atmosphere thick with tension, filled with hair-pulling, foul language, and even some physical altercations. The news spread like wildfire that Rebecca had a hand in the destruction of my relationship, which led to some intense consequences for her. I've opted out of social media. I don't consider platforms like Reddit to fall under that category. However, I've been informed that Rebecca faced significant backlash online. She was unfollowed and unfriended by many, and harassment followed her both in digital spaces and in her day-to-day life. Her salon suffered, too. 2 of her stylists decided to jump ship because of the scandal, and those who remained soon found themselves bombarded with inquiries from clients questioning how they could still work there or whether they were also considering leaving. After a month or 2 of this turmoil, the financial strain became overwhelming. Eventually, Rebecca couldn't keep up with the lease on her salon and was forced to shut it down. The last I heard, she was working as a hostess at her brother's restaurant in Connecticut, a far cry from her previous life. In a fit of anger, I toyed with the idea of demolishing her condo, similar to the scene in Forrest Gump where he takes down Jenny's childhood home, a place associated with her traumatic past. The thought crossed my mind due to all the unspeakable acts that had taken place there. However, the residents in the adjacent units were less than enthusiastic about my plan, and many hinted that the destruction might not be the best course of action. There were whispers among acquaintances, suggesting some kind of chemistry between me and my lawyer, Nadia. Initially, I thought these comments were ludicrous, maybe the result of some wild assumptions or even drug-induced delusions. But as it turned out, I was blissfully unaware of the signals women send when they're interested. After my divorce was finalized and given that Nadia was no longer my attorney for the civil suit that never materialized, I agreed to go out for drinks with her and some colleagues to celebrate. As the evening wore on and people trickled out, she pulled me aside to discuss one last thing. I assumed she was going to ask me for a favorable review for her firm's website or something along those lines. Instead, she surprised me by expressing genuine admiration for the loyalty and dedication I had shown to my wife and my children, even throughout the messy divorce. Over the course of our legal dealings, she had developed a genuine attraction to me. But she had refrained from saying anything earlier, aware of the professional boundaries in place. She admitted she found me difficult to read, unsure if I felt any chemistry with her. Yet, she recognized a good man when she saw one and was determined to take a chance. It was a flattering moment, particularly after enduring the painful realization that I hadn't been enough for my wife, who had cheated with enough men to assemble a football team. In a moment of sincerity, Nadia mentioned that if I ever wanted to grab a drink or just talk, I should reach out. Nadia is undeniably attractive, and it's hard to imagine any man, barring those who are blind, disagreeing with that assessment. She's not just a pretty face, she's intelligent, talented, and has her life together in a way that is apparent the moment you meet her. She clearly works out often. Lawyers have a knack for wanting to look good in court. She has a way of dressing that's both classy and appealing, which is something any gentleman would appreciate. There was a day in court when she showed up in a pinstriped suit, and I wouldn't be surprised if the judge would have granted me custody of his kid simply based on her appearance. Even with my jaded perspective, it's clear she would be a fantastic partner for any man lucky enough to catch her eye. But for me, the potential of dating her, or anyone else, for that matter, seems like more trouble than it's worth. I know I would subconsciously project my past judgments onto her, which she doesn't deserve and certainly can't change. The same unfair scrutiny would befall any woman I might feel an interest in. I've had numerous guys urge me to sign up for a dating app, suggesting I should hook up with someone random to help move on from my past. However, I can't bring myself to do it. Marie is still the only woman I've been intimate with, and it's disappointing to admit that to my friends. When a buddy showed me the local Tinder prospects, I made it clear I wasn't interested in joining the app. Had I really wanted to notch my bedpost with someone new, as one message suggested, I would have pursued a more adventurous route. It frustrates me to think that Marie took something I once cherished and stripped it from my life permanently. Reflecting on the moments of intimacy I once shared with Marie fills me with discomfort and an unsettling realization. Each memory now feels tainted by the knowledge that she engaged in those same acts and much more degrading behavior with numerous other men. In contemporary Western society, many would likely label me as prudish or desperate for having only ever been intimate with one woman. Yet, I find myself feeling as sullied as a Victorian streetwalker in the grimy alleyways of old London, just from the thought that I was intimate with her. Marie took everything that made sex meaningful for me and stripped it away, rendering it impossible for me to recapture that essence. Our exclusivity, our vows, our union, everything we once held sacred was discarded so she could chase fleeting pleasures with a stranger who had no place in our marriage. The betrayal was compounded by her lies. Oh, the lies were endless. For a considerable time, I would reflect on any kindness she ever expressed toward me and question its truth. Every compliment and affirmation became suspect, muddling my sense of reality. She drove me to doubt my own sanity, my ability as a parent, my strength, and my self-worth. The thought of returning to that state is unbearable. I refuse to revisit that dark place in my life. Despite feeling utterly alone, I am living proof that I don't need a woman to be complete. I am currently navigating life without her, demonstrating that I can exist independently and thrive. I harbor no animosity toward women. In fact, I genuinely wish the best for them, especially for my daughter Carrie, who will grow into a woman one day. However, at this point, I cannot perceive how any woman could enhance my life. It seems that involvement only complicates existence. While some women might feel similarly about men, the broader picture reveals a painful truth. Human beings, regardless of gender, can be a burden to one another, often untrustworthy and not deserving of the effort required for meaningful relationships. The question of Carrie's biological father frequently arises, prompting me to conduct substantial research on DNA ancestry sites. My primary concern is that if there exists a match within those databases, the corresponding individual could be alerted, especially if Carrie were to take a test revealing connections to a cousin, uncle, or even her biological father. As her protector, the thought of someone intruding into her life unnerves me. She is a healthy child without apparent genetic issues, so I have decided to postpone any testing for the foreseeable future. My current mindset is to wait until at least her mid to late teens, perhaps even into her 20s, when she can make her own informed decision. There are moments when I contemplate whether I should keep the truth of her paternity a secret. If I could seek advice, it would focus on determining what is genuinely in Carrie's best interest. Would it be advisable to never disclose her actual parentage, considering everything that has transpired? Should I wait until she is a teenager or ready to face the truth as an adult? My own feelings are already settled, as I have come to terms with the reality of my situation. I am trying to prepare myself for any future scenarios, whether they are positive or negative. There's a lingering concern about the possibility of her developing a medical condition where knowing her paternal medical history might be essential. I understand that any DNA testing related to genealogy will likely occur several years down the line. With her mother recently out of the picture, I want to ensure I don't inadvertently destabilize her sense of security and confidence in her identity or mine. It's a unique and challenging position to be in, filled with conflicting emotions, and I find myself sincerely hoping both of my children inherit the best qualities from their fathers. As I conclude my thoughts, I want to extend my gratitude specifically to Reddit user Kranik for the invaluable advice during my difficult journey. Your insights, regardless of your true age, reflect a wisdom that has profoundly impacted me. You managed to analyze Marie, pointing out vulnerabilities I had left open for her exploitation. When you described her desperation, I accepted your viewpoint, and in hindsight, it was spot on. Marie eventually discovered the consequences of her actions. I deeply appreciate the support offered by others who directed me toward healing and sent encouraging messages throughout this ordeal. My plan is to share this reflection, wait half a day, respond to a few comments over the next few days, and then consider this chapter closed. I seldom think about Marie anymore because I keep myself occupied with my new life, and I strive not to dwell on past occurrences. The past few days have been quite an emotional journey for me, and I find myself reflecting deeply on everything that has transpired. My children truly are my entire world. They bring so much joy and fulfillment to my life. I also genuinely enjoy my job, which keeps me busy and engaged, and the financial compensation is just a bonus that comes with the privilege of doing something I love. I want to express my sincere hope that any Australians reading this know that my intention was never to offend anyone. I find it disheartening to be the messenger of bad news that affects your country, especially when you, like me, do not deserve to be in such a situation. On a lighter note, there's a humorous piece of advice to share. If you ever find yourself in a bar and witness someone enjoying the night a bit too much, perhaps someone in a skirt without any underwear attempting a split, just gently rock them back and forth. It's a playful way to help them out of what could be an awkward predicament, and I assure you, it'll get them back on their feet. For those who are taking the time to read this, I genuinely appreciate it, and I wish you a great day or night ahead. If you haven't read it, I want to keep things concise but meaningful. Today, I had a session with my therapist during lunch. I had sent her the previous post so she could see the comments and everything that has been going on in my life. She found them to be incredibly insightful and expressed her admiration for the community that has nudged me toward exploring my feelings for Nadia. After our discussion, she advised me to take things slowly with her while being honest with both Nadia and myself. After concluding my session, I felt motivated to reach out to Nadia. I called her up and asked if I could swing by to get her thoughts on a few things. After dropping the kids off at their grandparents', I made my way to her office to talk more about what was on my mind. Frankly, I have no real experience in dating. I've never had to navigate these waters before. Flirting doesn't come naturally to me, so I rely on my kindness, humor, and sincerity. When Nadia realized that I didn't have any legal issues needing to be discussed and that my visit was purely personal, a bright grin spread across her face. I opened up to her about my thoughts and the conversations I've had with friends since our last meet-up. I admitted that I was terrified to open up and give her a real chance, but I knew I needed to step up, especially since she had bravely put herself out there. I expressed my concerns about how our differences might affect any potential relationship, citing my kids and the fact that she doesn't have children. Surprisingly, she shared that she had enjoyed meeting my kids and asked if I had any reservations about her not being a mother yet, to which I replied that I had none. I did voice a slight worry about our differing sizes. I'm quite tall, and she's petite, and I mused about how my clumsiness could pose a risk. Nadia reassured me, confidently stating that she was tough, emphasizing that great things often come in small packages. As our conversation continued, I found myself feeling nervous yet relieved. I told her that while I appreciated her offer to take things further physically, I wasn't quite ready for that yet. She laughed and blushed, fully understanding my awkward sense of humor. In exciting news, both Nadia and I have the upcoming Friday and Monday off because of the holiday weekend. We've made plans for Thursday night, where I will treat her to dinner at a nice restaurant followed by a visit to a fantastic martini bar that I know of. While I am still a bit anxious about everything, I feel an undeniable comfort in talking to her and being in her presence. We've agreed to take things at a slow pace, which I think is wise. However, I've decided that this will be my last post, as I prefer not to have an audience for this part of my life. If things work out between us, that's great, but if not, I will come to terms with it and handle it privately. I just don't want anyone to feel disappointed if it doesn't pan out. So, hopefully, you all understand where I'm coming from. I am genuinely grateful for the support I've received in navigating through the darkest times of my life. My therapist echoes this gratitude, and I sincerely wish all of you love, success, and peace. Your kindness has helped a stranger online like me to slowly pick up the pieces of my broken life, and for that, I thank you all from the bottom of my heart.